Chapter 23:32. Yuan was overjoyed when she saw that Ling Yunwu had listened to her suggestion. She reluctantly parted with Ling Yunwu, and a blue flying sword appeared under her feet and flew into the distance. Don't ever mention the horrifying phoenix again. After Yuan flew far away, Ling Yunwu coldly glared at the disciple and said, "Fortunately, this is your martial uncle. If it was someone else who wanted to get to the bottom of the matter, how would you answer? Do you want thousands of swordsmen to suffer the wrath of Senior Hua Jian?" "Yes, I know my mistake." The disciple who drew the sword immediately understood the crux of the matter and hurriedly replied with a bow. "However, what you said is not without reason." Ling Yunwu squinted his eyes and looked in the direction of Sky Patrol City. Although the possibility is very small, if it's true, then the disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect are really interesting. "Let's go." Ling Yunwu thought for a while and waved his hand. He led the disciples across the mountain range of Golden Spring Mountain and flew in the direction of Sky Patrol City. However, they had just flown for a few miles when they were greeted by a dozen bird cultivators. Each bird cultivator was dragging a small dwarf on their back. Ling Yunwu did not dare to delay. He stopped in midair and cupped his hands. Ling Yunwu of the Soaring Wind Sword Sect greets sword friend Feiyu. The bird cultivators stopped in midair. The one in front flapped his wings and glanced sharply at Ling Yunwu. He said coldly, "Soaring Wind Sword Sect? Your attack area doesn't seem to be here, right?" "Hee, sword friend Feiyu, I'll let you know that I've lost something, and I need to find it nearby." "What is it?" "It's not a good thing to let you know about it," Ling Yunwu said with a smile. "Senior Qi and the others should know about it." "Yes." The bird cultivator nodded slightly. "I'm Ing Chao of the Quilted Mountain Sect. I'm looking for a cultivator here. Can I help you?" "Oh? Are there any cultivators from the Taoist sect hiding here?" Ling Yunwu asked curiously. "I've been searching here for several days, but I didn't find any clues." This old man flew past this place earlier, but I don't know any Dao sect cultivators." Ing Chao nodded and said, "But a few days ago, not far from here, my Flying Feather Sect's fellow disciples and the giants encountered dozens of Dao Sect's Foundation establishment cultivators in a row. Just as they were about to kill these cultivators, the giants sent over another dozen cultivators. One of the tall and thin Foundation establishment cultivators killed 3 of my Flying Feather Sect's fellow disciples and even scared the giants away." He scared the giant away?" Ling Yunwu asked curiously, "Is this Foundation establishment cultivator very powerful?" What fellow Taoist Ling doesn't know is that the cultivator used a long staff to bend a giant's mace and send the giant into the ground. His strength is frightening. The giants tremble with fear and don't dare to continue fighting. A strange expression appeared on Ing Chao's face. Ling Yunwu sucked in a breath of cold air. Suddenly, he realized something and hurriedly said, "A tall and thin cultivator? Are you a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect?" This old man doesn't know." Ing Chao shook his head slightly, then turned his head and asked, "Do you know?" The closest bird cultivator was the one who was chased away by Xiaohua. He also shook his head and said, "This subordinate can't tell if he's a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect." Ling Yunwu thought for a moment, then took out the sword slip and played the image. It's him." Although the bird cultivator couldn't see Xiaohua's appearance, Xiaohua's ghost-like flying speed, his tall and thin figure, and the Imperial Thunder Sect's Taoist robe frightened the bird cultivator. His wings trembled non-stop, and the dwarf on his back almost fell from the sky. "Idiot!" Ing Chao cursed, then looked at Ling Yunwu and asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling is also looking for this person?" "That's right." Ling Yunwu clenched his teeth. "It's him. It seems that I didn't find the wrong person this time." "Good, since that's the case." Ing Chao nodded and said, "Then this old man will lend you a hand." "Fellow Taoist Feiyu knows where this person is?" Ling Yunwu couldn't believe it. Ing Chao shook his wings and said with a smile, "Although this old man doesn't know, the little friend on my back knows." "Fellow Taoist Uni Cave knows?" Ling Yunwu was puzzled and looked at the dwarf on Ing Chao's back. That's right, this old man knows. The dwarf proudly raised his neck and explained what he found, then added, this old man and the others found traces of Taoist sect cultivators here, so they shouldn't be far from here. Good. Ling Yunwu was so excited that he wanted to clap his hands. This Ling thanks fellow Taoist Uni Cave. Ha, you're welcome, you're welcome. The dwarf was very happy, and his facial features were squeezed together, as if being recognized by an illusory sword sect cultivator was an extremely amazing thing. This old man and the others are just scouts. Ying Chao smiled coldly and said, if this old man's guess is correct, this should be a secret place for Taoist sect cultivators, and it should be the spirit stone vein we're looking for. Behind this old man, there are thousands of sword cultivators waiting. As long as we confirm it, they will immediately come. At that time, not only will we be able to find fellow Taoist Ling's things, we can even divide the large amount of spirit stones. Good. That's exactly what I want. Ling Yunwu laughed and said, then what are we hesitating for? Let's go. Good. Straightforward. Ying Chao shook his wings, and a trace of a smile flashed in his eyes. His body flew up again, and he carried the dwarf and flew towards the mountain range of Quanjin Mountain. At this time, there was already some snow on Quanjin Mountain, and palm-sized snowflakes fell from the clouds. Moreover, the thick layers of clouds were stacked in the air above Quanjin Mountain, as if a waterfall was pouring down from the sky, and it was even more spectacular. Jeez! Ying Chao cried out a few times. More than 10 bird cultivators rushed up the tall Golden Spring mountain range. They ascended in a straight line and gradually approached the cumulus clouds. Whoa! An intense wind whistling sound was emitted from Ying Chao's body. Following which, more than 10 bird cultivators actually crashed into the clouds. In an instant, more than 10 huge holes were opened up in the dark clouds. The dark clouds sprinkled on their bodies, and their feathers were blown up one by one. The dwarves on their backs were already frightened out of their wits, and each of them hugged onto the backs of the bird cultivators, and shrunk their heads deep into their chests, not even daring to look. Looking at their situation, compared to the high spirits of the bird cultivators, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. Ling Yunwu naturally would not follow the bird cultivators into the clouds, and he did not understand the actions of these bird cultivators. Just as he was frowning slightly, more than 10 sounds rang out, and more than 10 bird cultivators once again flew out from the clouds, and separately flew towards the surroundings of Quanjin Mountain. What are these bird cultivators trying to do? A disciple saw Ling Yunwu frowning, and also said in agreement, who doesn't know that they are flying high? I'm afraid they want to see the size of Quanjin Mountain. Assign the scouting positions. Ling Yunwu said indifferently. Let's go, I want to see where Ying Chao is. Ying Chao, with the dwarf on his back, landed in the air several hundred feet away from Ling Yunwu, and still maintained that kind of extreme speed. The dwarf on his back really could not bear this kind of stimulation, and shouted out loudly. With a loud bang, Ying Chao's wings suddenly spread open, and his whole body immediately became as stable as a falling leaf, slowly floating towards the northeast corner of Quanjin Mountain. When he was only several feet away from the forest of Quanjin Mountain, the dwarf let go of his hand and jumped down from Ying Chao's back. It was obvious that the dwarf's legs were somewhat trembling. When the dwarf landed in the forest, he heard a burst of crackling sounds, and the dwarf in Ling Yunwu's eyes suddenly disappeared. Oh, this dwarf knows the 5 elements escape technique. Ling Yunwu suddenly understood why Ying Chao and the other bird cultivators brought the dwarf over. Just now, the dwarf only said that he found the traces of Xiao Hua and the others, and did not say that he used the earth derivation technique to avoid Xiao Hua's divine sense, so Ling Yunwu was shocked. Flying in front of Ying Chao, Ling Yunwu cupped his hands and said, Sword friend Ying Chao, this dwarf actually knows the 5 elements escape technique? It is this Ling who is ignorant and inexperienced. It's nothing but a thing that hides underground all day long, not daring to see people. At this time, Ying Chao had already returned to his human form. He was a swordsman with a thin figure and sallow skin. His 2 slender eyes flashed with arrogance from time to time. If I did not ask them to help find the traces of cultivators, How could this old man let them sit on my back? Ling Yunwu suddenly understood why the bird cultivators rushed into the sky just now. This Ling also knows some things about the sword domain since childhood, and now I have cultivated to the illusory sword, but this mysterious dwarf, and also this giant, I still do not know much. I wonder if sword friend Feiyu can enlighten me? Ling Yunwu cupped his hands and asked very modestly. Don't ask me, this old man also does not know. Ing Chao waved his hand disdainfully. It's nothing more than digging holes in the ground, what do you know about them? Then he looked at Ling Yunwu and said with a serious expression, it's not that this old man doesn't want to say, this old man really does not know. If Senior Qi did not call them out, he must know that there are such strange people in my sword domain. Oh, Ling Yunwu was quite disappointed. He looked at the ground and said, the dwarf's 5 elements escape technique is similar to the Taoist sect's magic star. It should be different. Ing Chao shook his head and said, this is the dwarf's earth amplification technique. It is said that the dwarf was born with a remarkable ability. It is similar to the giant's infinite strength. However, the dwarf is really too timid, so it is not good to show. Perhaps. Ling Yunwu's eyes did not leave the forest, as if he wanted to see the dwarf's trace. Ing Chao did not speak, and his figure stood there straight. From afar, he looked very proud and aloof. The dwarf had long been frightened out of his wits. When he swore that he would never sit on the bird cultivator's back again, he saw that the distance to the ground was not high, so he immediately jumped down from Ing Chao's back. Although his figure was small, he still crashed into a tree, and even broke a branch. After the dwarf landed on the ground, he did not escape into the depths but instead hid under the soil layer. He let out a long sigh and stayed in a daze for as long as a meal. Only then did his figure sway and escape into the depths of Golden Spring Mountain. Chapter 23:33. As the dwarf moved downwards, his nose twitched. Sometimes he would move left, sometimes he would move right, sometimes he would dive down, sometimes he would move up, as if there really was a path beneath the earth. The dwarf's earth amplification technique was different from Xiao Hua's earth escape technique. There wasn't any brilliance protecting the dwarf's body. As long as the dwarf moved his hands and feet, his body would move. Everything was the same as a mortal walking on the ground. However, after the dwarf stealthily moved for a long time, his body began to slow down. The dwarf's face wasn't alarmed, but rather happy. This proved that the earth here was different from other places, and this was exactly what he was looking for. Sure enough, after another hour, the earth beneath his feet became incomparably hard. The dwarf was no longer able to move even half a step forward. The dwarf looked left and right. Then he followed the hard earth towards the Golden Spring Mountain Range. And within the Golden Spring Mountain Range, in a secluded area within a palace-like cave, Tu Hong and Lan Xan were sitting on 2 chairs with expressionless faces. In front of the chairs was a square mirror that was 10 feet wide, and the mirror was covered in an earthy yellow color. And in this earthy yellow haze, there was a dark red thread that was like a blood-red thread that was extremely obvious on the lower half of the mirror. Not too far away from this blood-red thread, there were dozens of pitch-black dots that were slowly moving towards it. Great General! Seeing the dots come closer and closer, Lan Xen couldn't help but be moved. She whispered, "This sword cultivator, where did he find such a master? There are actually dozens of them. They actually know the 5-element escape technique." However, Tu Hong didn't seem to hear her. His face was indifferent as he coldly watched those black dots approach the blood-red thread. Seeing Tu Hong not respond, Lan Xian first stopped talking. But after another cup of tea's worth of cultivation, she couldn't help but remind him again, "Great General. They are getting closer and closer. I fear they will discover the spells of my Golden Spring Mountain Range." "Old brother Lan." Tu Hong looked up and sighed, "I have reminded you more than once that the path of a general is to first control your heart. Even if a spiritual mountain collapses in front of you, your complexion won't change. Even if an elk rises to the left, your eyes won't blink. Then, you will be able to control the situation and deal with the enemy. If you can't even handle the tricks of a dozen ghastly clowns, how can you improve your cultivation?" Alas, great general. That's easy to say but difficult to do. Lan Xian sighed. This old woman also knows that there is nothing to fear from these dozens of clowns. But what about behind them? That was over 1,000 sword cultivators. Even if my Golden Spring Mountain disciples are not afraid of them, wouldn't my Golden Spring Mountain spirit stone mine be exposed? The great general's foundation was gone soon? Without Quan Jinshan, the great general's position in Sky Patrol City is also in jeopardy. Elder brother Lan was worried about this too, but this too mocked elder brother instead. This too is really unbearable. Tu Hong's expression slightly changed. He stood up and cupped his hands. This too apologizes to elder brother. It's nothing. Lan Xian hurriedly blocked Tu Hong. She smiled and said, this old woman also wants to borrow the strength of the great general to cultivate to the Golden Core realm. This is also for my own sake. Old brother Lan, this too knows what you're thinking. Tu Hong took advantage of the situation to sit down. He pointed his finger and said, actually, what elder brother is thinking is that Golden Spring Mountain Spirit Stone Mine will be discovered by the sword cultivators. You even vaguely mentioned before that the arrival of the disciples from the 3 countries would attract the attention of the sword cultivators and bring a devastating disaster to my Golden Spring Mountain? That's right, this old man did say that. Lan Xian nodded without concealing anything. The Dusk Mansion's conference hall is simply a high and mighty place. They blindly give orders. If they didn't send any disciples here, my Golden Spring Mountain would have concealed it well. Even after 1,000 years, we wouldn't have to worry about being discovered by the sword cultivators. But now, how many days has it been since their reinforcements arrived? The sword cultivators have already chased after us. Tu Hong nodded. He didn't comment. Instead, he asked, did you find that disciple that randomly broke into the Spirit Stone Mine? There wasn't any trace of him. Lan Xian found it strange that Tu Hong would suddenly ask this. She shook her head and said, also, I didn't see any changes in Golden Spring Mountain spells. I'm afraid that disciple was mistaken. What kind of rumors can there be among the disciples of the 3 countries? Tu Hong suddenly asked. Rumors? Lan Xian was puzzled. She blankly said, no. I didn't hear any rumors. That's good. Tu Hong nodded, a relieved look on his face. He said, my Golden Spring Mountain's array formation is very tight. Since no outsiders have infiltrated, then that means that the unknown figure is a cultivator from within my Golden Spring Mountain. Of course, this is only a guess. Perhaps there isn't. Moreover, there aren't any rumors right now. The sword cultivator's attack is imminent, so who cares if there isn't? Yes. Lan Xian still couldn't make sense of this, so she could only nod. There are many things that I don't want old brother Lan to know. As Tu Hong saw this, he mysteriously smiled and said, as long as I pass through this great sword battle at Golden Spring Mountain, whether or not Golden Spring Mountain is exposed, it will be harmless to me. The Lord City Lord of Sky Patrol City, he will definitely reward me. Ah? Lan Xian was stunned. Then, as if she thought of something, she raised her eyebrows and said, so, shoot. Tu Hong raised his index finger and placed it on his lips. He smiled and said, there are some things that cannot be said. Who knows if there is another cultivator that we cannot detect next to this cave? Let's wait for this matter to end. Oh look, the sword cultivators are approaching the barrier. As he said this, Tu Hong pointed his finger at the 4 sides of the mirror. Sure enough, dozens of small dots were approaching the blood threads from all directions. However, just as these small dots were about to approach the blood threads, they all stopped there. Then, they were like ants on a hot pan. After circling around for a moment, they scattered and started to swim around the blood threads. Lan Xian's face showed a trace of relief. But Tu Hong frowned. After a moment, he whispered, the earth layer of this spirit stone mine is very solid. It is what my Golden Spring Mountain's defensive array formation relies on, but it is also a place that is easily discovered. Although these sword cultivators cannot go deep into the earth layer, they should already know that there is something strange below. Then, Tu Hong looked up and said, "Old brother Lon, go and inform the disciples of the Dawn Array to kill the sword cultivators near them." Lon Exon hesitated for a moment, then cupped her hands and said, "This old woman will go now." Not long after Lon Exon walked out, she saw that there weren't any superfluous images on the mirror. Instead, the 3 small dots that were cruising above the blood-red lines suddenly began to accelerate, as if they had been frightened and began to flee in all directions. Seeing the 3 small dots getting further and further away from the blood threads, Tu Hong was a little surprised, and his face gradually became dignified. When the small dots broke away from the yellow mirror, Tu Hong clapped his hands again, and a misty brilliance emitted from his hands, covering the 4 sides of the mirror. The mirror began to shrink, and when it had shrunk to the size of a foot, Tu Hong clenched his hand, and a yellow light appeared between his fingers. He tightly grasped the mirror, and as the yellow light lingered, the mirror transformed into the shape of a 3 rhombus. Chapter 23:34. Quick! Tu Hong shouted. He pointed his finger once more, and a yellow light shot out from the tri-rhombus mirror, turning into a rectangular light screen. Dwarves? So they were dwarves. This old man thought they were sword cultivators. On the light screen, the images of 3 dwarves were reflected. At this time, Lon Exan also hurried in. She anxiously said, "Hi General, hi General," but as he saw the light screen projected into the air, he stopped, his eyes flashing with anxiety. Tu Hong didn't bother with Lon Exan. Instead, he urged the mirror to slowly rotate. Gradually, the bird cultivator Ing Chao's face also flashed on the light screen. Ing Chao's complexion was as ugly as Lon Exan's. It seemed that after hearing the dwarf's report, he was unable to make a decision. Ing Chao, who was standing on the light screen, was startled. A sharp light flashed in his eyes as he waved his hand, turning it into an eagle's wing that streaked across the air. Immediately, Tu Hong's light screen turned into a blur, destroying Tu Hong's light screen that was moving towards Ling Yunwu. Tu Hong wasn't surprised. He slapped his hand, hitting the tri-rhombus mirror. The mirror gradually shrank, turning into a small triangle that fell into his hand. Tu Hong looked up at Lon Exan and smiled. "Old brother Lon, you also saw it?" This old man received a report from a disciple that went out to kill a sword cultivator. As soon as I learned that dwarves had appeared, I immediately came back to report. Lon Exan forced a smile. "Dwarves? I don't know how many years it has been since they've appeared in the Huan Nation. There are records of dwarves in Sky Patrol City." Tu Hong didn't seem particularly surprised. "But it's not particularly detailed. I didn't look at it carefully. I only know that dwarves are born with the ability to escape through the earth, but I don't know anything else." "Hi General, you should take a good look." Lon Exan knew that it was useless to say more, but she still complained, "Hi General, you guard Golden Spring Mountain, you should know more about the Huan Nation." If it weren't for the fact that I wanted to see if there was any secret technique that Yu Meng had, I fear that I wouldn't even know about this." Tu Hong didn't hide his purpose. "Since the dwarves have appeared, the underground defensive array of my Golden Spring Mountain, I'm afraid it won't be as optimistic as we thought." Lon Exan thought for a moment and then said, "Although I don't know whether or not this dwarf can break through this array formation, we still have to take precautions." "Yes, this too naturally knows." Tu Hong nodded, and then his face turned solemn, saying, "Just now, that bird cultivator discovered this two's spying, but I didn't see the face of the sword cultivator beside him. However, it seems that the sword cultivator's cultivation isn't low. He's either a grade 6 brilliant sword or a grade 1 illusory sword. If he's only a grade 1 illusory sword, it'll be troublesome." "Will an illusory sword cultivator appear?" Lon Exan frowned as she heard this. "My Dao Sex Golden Core cultivator hasn't even made a move yet, but the sword cultivator's illusory swordsman." As Lon Exan spoke to her, she stopped. Obviously, she was thinking of Qin Jian. Since Qin Jian, who was at the illusory sword realm, could kill a Dao sect disciple, it wasn't strange for an illusory swordsman to appear here. "Old brother Lon, Arrange for some trusted disciples to bring Yu Meng to a safe place. Tu Hong pondered for a moment and ordered. Ah! Lan Xian was stunned. However, he was only stunned for a moment. He bowed and said, "This old man understands." But just as he turned around, he stopped and asked in a low voice, "Also, do you want to send several female disciples of the Tao sect to go with her?" This. Tu Hong hesitated for a moment and then nodded. "Old brother Lan, you can arrange it as you see fit. As long as they don't become suspicious, it's fine." "Ha, I asked General to rest assured." Lan Xian turned and quickly walked away. Looking at Lan Xian's departing figure, Tu Hong had a relieved expression on his face. He whispered to himself, "Yu Meng, as long as you are safe, then this too can rest assured. Just you wait. In a few years, you will be able to restore yourself to how you were before. This too will be able to fulfill the blood oath I made in the past." Not to mention Tu Hong's arrangements at Golden Spring Mountain, Ling Yunwu was anxiously waiting at the top of Golden Spring Mountain. All of a sudden, he saw 3 bird-type cultivators carrying 3 dwarves with pale faces flying over. He immediately flew over and shouted, "Have you found any sword cultivators?" Who would have thought that the 3 dwarves would be so scared that their courage had been broken? Their mouths were tightly shut, not saying a single word. Ling Yunwu had no choice but to follow them and land in front of Ying Chao. Ying Chao smiled and asked, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. What did you encounter underground?" Reporting to High Master Ying. One of the bird cultivators revealed his human form and cupped his hands across his chest. This disciple heard this dwarf say that he encountered an incomparably hard layer of stone below ground and was unable to go any further. Moreover, as he was looking for a flaw, 2 Tao sect cultivators suddenly appeared and attacked him without saying a single word. "Good." Ying Chao clapped his hands and said, "The hard layer of stone must be where the spirit stone vein is located." Tao sect cultivators also appeared. "Is there any need to say anything?" While they were talking, Ying Chao shouted and looked towards the forest. With a wave of his arm, his figure flew up and shouted, "Quickly call out the other dwarves. There is a golden core cultivator in this spirit stone vein. We will talk after we retreat." "Oh? It really is that bastard?" Ling Yunwu's face revealed a sinister expression. "Since that bastard is here, I will turn this terrifying phoenix into a dead chicken man." Immediately after, Ling Yunwu also flew up on his sword and went straight into the sky. He waited for the bird cultivators to fly over with the dwarves before flying away with Ying Chao. Naturally, not long after they flew away, the bird cultivators who flew extremely high returned. They circled above the clouds in the sky, constantly monitoring the movements of Jinquan Mountain. Xiao Hua, who was regarded as a dead chicken man by Ling Yunwu, was incomparably free and unfettered at this time. Except for the day when he sneaked into the depths of the spirit stone vein, he was a little cautious and did not go again. For the next few days, he casually said a few words to Ming Mao and then left. He secretly escaped into the depths of the spirit stone vein and used the wishful staff to mine for jade essence. Damn it, this young master has never seen so many spirit stones. No, it's jade essence. Damn it, if every day, every moment, how good would it be to mine jade essence like this? Xiao Hua's eyes were shining. The wishful staff in his hand was constantly waving, and every time it was waved, a large or small piece of jade essence would fall. It was immediately absorbed into his space. That jade essence was really a strange thing between heaven and earth. It was incomparably hard, and previously it was perfectly round. Xiao Hua could only use the silver-gilded dragon sword to dig out a small piece. Later, he was able to follow the traces of digging and use the wishful staff. Moreover, with each piece of jade essence, Xiao Hua had a very familiar feeling. Seems this young master often did this kind of thing before? Is it possible that this young master is a low-level cultivator who mines spirit stones? Xiao Hua scratched his head. Or, is it a spirit stone mine worker? Yes, mining jade essence and reclaiming wasteland were so similar, how could Xiao Hua not feel familiar? And if possible, after the war, this young master will find an opportunity to go to a spirit stone mine and see if I can mix in as a miner. Not only can I satisfy my cravings, but I can also earn some spirit stones. Unfortunately, just as Xiao Hua was imagining his happy life in the future, a 1,000 miles sound transmitting talisman quietly appeared in front of his eyes. What happened to Ming Mao? Which little bastard actually dared to provoke our Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple, and even hindered this young master's wealth? It would be strange if this young master didn't beat you until you were crippled. Xiao Hua was angry. When he gave Ming Mao the sound-transmitting talisman, he said that unless it was a last resort, she must not look for him. However, when Xiao Hua flew back and saw Ming Mao standing there peacefully without any other cultivators beside her, he couldn't help but frown. Senior sister Ming Mao, did someone disturb you? Where is he? He, junior brother Xiao, are you that concerned about your senior sister? Ming Mao said with a smile. Did you immediately stop cultivating and fly over to protect senior sister as soon as you received the sound-transmitting talisman? Xiao Hua was speechless when he saw how narcissistic Ming Mao was, even saying that she had secretly gone out to cultivate. After thinking for a while, he said with a smile, this little brother has a secret technique to familiarize himself with, but since senior sister Ming Mao has something to do, this little brother can't not come. Actually, if you really have a secret technique to cultivate, you can just tell Captain Cui. He will definitely cultivate with you and won't need to be on guard duty. Ming Mao said with a smile. Tell him? Xiao Hua curled his lips. I'm lazy. Don't you know? I know you're lazy. Can I tell him? Ming Mao felt very good about herself. You can't let your face affect your cultivation, right? No need. Hearing Ming Mao speak so intimately with him, Xiao Hua's intuition told him that Fairy Hong Xia's fingernails and Xue Xue's teeth had appeared behind him. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, Senior sister, why did you suddenly send me a message? Can't I send a message if there's nothing? Ming Mao asked back, shouldn't you be on guard duty with this concubine? Senior sister is joking. Hurry up and say it. This little brother's secret technique is still lacking. Xiao Hua saw Ming Mao take a step forward and immediately retreated 2 steps back and said with a smile. Ming Mao pouted and said unhappily, it's nothing much. It's just that Captain Cui's message talisman asked us to return. It seems like they haven't finished patrolling yet. Xiao Hua looked around and said curiously, could it be that something happened? Who knows? The message talisman didn't say anything. Ming Mao also shook her head blankly. However, when they returned to the quiet room and heard Cui Hongshan's explanation, Xiao Hua was stunned. What? They want to send a few female cultivators to escort a very important item back to Sky Patrol City? Are you kidding me? Not to mention that there are many female cultivators in Quanjin Mountain. Why did they choose 3 female disciples from my Imperial Thunder Sect? Furthermore, didn't they want to conceal the information about Quanjin Mountain Spirit Stone Mine? If we escort the item out now, wouldn't it increase the chances of being exposed? But you can't bear to let senior sister Ming Mao go out? Dui Qiming saw that Xiao Hua was puzzled and asked so many questions in a row and chuckled. But Xiao Hua was speechless. He waved his hand and said, I don't have any opinion. I just feel that it's a little strange. It doesn't matter if it's strange or not. Cui Hongshan ignored Xiao Hua's strangeness and waved his hand. This is a good thing for my Imperial Thunder Sect. She could only hint, don't force yourself. Listen to the opinions of others. This concubine will wait for my husband at Sky Patrol City. The word, husband, awakened Cui Hongshan's tenderness and arrogance. He nodded and didn't say anything else. He watched as Dui Qiming, Ming Mao, and Dui Ling left with the Jinshan Quanjin Mountain disciple. After the 3 figures disappeared, Cui Hongshan waved his hand and said, Fellow junior apprentice brothers, it seems that the war is imminent. Our previous thoughts were too naive. Although this place is deep underground, it has already been discovered by the sword cultivators. Let's stop patrolling for now and focus on controlling the array formation. This will give us a chance to save our lives. Zhen Minghui and the others nodded. but they didn't disperse. Cui Hongshan understood. He turned to look at Xiao Hua and said indifferently, "What do you think?" "Nothing." Xiao Hua waved his hand, "Just don't go too far from this, Xiao." Then Xiao Hua turned and walked out. What are you going to do?" Cui Hongshan couldn't help but ask. "This Xiao is naturally going to be on duty." Xiao Hua didn't even turn his head. What nonsense! The sword cultivators were about to arrive. No matter who was in charge of Jinshan Quanjin Mountain, there probably wouldn't be a good opportunity to mine more jade essence in the future. Xiao Hua definitely needed to mine more jade essence. Thinking about how he just said that he didn't need to be on duty, Cui Hongshan was a bit angry. "Captain Cui, let's hurry up and look at the array formation," Zhen Minghui hurriedly said. "Junior apprentice Brother Zhao's cultivation is profound and isn't afraid of this. But we can't always rely on Junior apprentice Brother Zhao's protection. If we can use a bit more of the array formation's power, we will have a bit more chance of survival." Cui Hongshan clapped his hands and took out a jade slip. Chapter 23:36. Dong dong. The sound became increasingly hurried, like footsteps, but also like a deliberate rhythm, smashing onto the ground and knocking on everyone's hearts. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to return to his quiet room, he heard a sharp whistle resounding throughout the entire Springgold Mountain mine. Groups after groups of Springgold Mountain disciples flew out from their respective resting places and flew towards different mountain caves. The thousands of Dao sect disciples who had come as reinforcements were also nervously flying back from their quiet rooms. Although the entire mine was in a mess, it was still in an orderly manner. Xiao Hua's appearance did not attract the attention of many people. Cui Hongshan and the rest naturally came out long ago. Seeing Xiao Hua return, they did not say much and waved their hands. "Follow this Cui." As he spoke, Cui Hongshan's figure flew up and flew straight towards the space where the Imperial Thunder Sect disciples entered Quanjin Mountain. When they arrived at the rather large space, the situation inside was already different. Not to mention that the atmosphere was very tense. Every Quanjin Mountain disciple's face was tense as they hurriedly commanded the incoming Dao sect disciples. Even the number of caves in the space had increased by a lot. Previously, when Xiao Hua and the rest entered, there were 4 to 5 connected tunnels in the space. Now, there were actually 40 to 50 tunnels, filling up the entire space. Every pitch-black cave had a Quanjin Mountain disciple guarding it. Hearing the disciple in the middle shouting out the name of the group that came as reinforcements, the disciple in charge would immediately raise his hand and invite the group of disciples to enter the tunnel through the cave above their heads. Looks like Quanjin Mountain is still different from Chicken Crow Mountain. Seeing such a chaotic situation, Xiao Hua was rather confident in his heart as he thought to himself, "This way, the 7 disciples of my Imperial Thunder Sect will be safe." In less than the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, it was the turn of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Hearing that it was the first team of the Imperial Thunder Sect, the innermost disciple immediately raised his hand to signal Cui Hongshan. Cui Hongshan understood and immediately activated his transcendence energy and flew to the front of the pitch-black tunnel. The disciple on guard clapped his hands and took out 7 yellow talismans and handed them to Cui Hongshan. He said, "Team Leader Cui, these are the yellow talismans for the passage of our Mount Quanjin array. Please take them well. With these yellow talismans, you will be able to pass freely within the array for 3 hours. Of course, Captain Cui, please restrain your disciples and don't move around randomly. We have to be in sync and deal with sword cultivators together." "I know." Cui Hongshan took the yellow talisman and nodded. "Please." The disciple stepped aside and raised his hand. "Please." Cui Hongshan also clasped his hands together and raised his head to take a look. His silhouette then flew up and rushed into the tunnel. After that, everyone followed suit, with Xiao Hua flying at the back. The tunnel was normal, but what was abnormal was that other than Cui Hongshan and the first team of the Imperial Thunder Sect, no other cultivators entered the tunnel. The cultivators of Jin Quan Mountain hurriedly set up their formation. Similarly, outside the mountain range of Jin Quan Mountain, a murderous aura soared to the heavens. A few li away from the Golden Spring Mountain, under the rare clear sky, within a radius of a few li, there was a spirit beast that was several zhang tall and 10 zhang long. It was unusually thick and sturdy, and it was approaching the Golden Spring Mountain in unison. The rhythm that was pounding on the ground was produced by these huge beasts. This was not including the trees. The most terrifying thing was that when these spirit beasts were pushed forward by a foot, the huge rocks, gentle slopes and trees in front of them were all destroyed by them. When these huge beasts saw the huge rocks in front of them, they immediately spat out a kind of liquid from an oval, fist-sized hole on their faces and landed on the rocks. Following that, from another small hole under the same hole, an earthen yellow light was emitted. Following that, the huge rocks immediately turned soft and slightly collapsed. By the time the huge beasts kicked a leg that was thicker than a pillar, the huge rocks had already turned into a pile of mud. Needless to say, the trees did not need any liquid. As long as the earthen yellow light swept past them, they would all collapse and turn into wood chips under the huge paws of the huge beasts. Behind the huge beasts, there were thousands of sword cultivators. All of them walked on their swords and their faces were extremely solemn. However, these sword cultivators who looked aloof and arrogant were just like their characters. They kept a distance from the huge beasts, as if they did not want to be associated with them. Looking at the sky above the huge beasts, there were hundreds of bird cultivators hovering in midair and gradually surrounding Jin Quan Mountain. A few miles away from the sword cultivators, in midair, Ling Yunwu was leading dozens of sword-nurturing disciples. He looked coldly at them. Beside him, there were also a few illusory sword cultivators and a few high-level beast cultivators. The bird cultivator Ying Chao was also among them. Sword friend Yuan Qing. Ling Yunwu finally could not hold it in and frowned. Your sky-scraping sword sect? With such preparations, aren't you giving the cultivators of Jin Quan Mountain a way out? If they escape from the south, then this Ling's matter. Cough cough. That old man dressed in khaki sword robes was Yuan Qing of the sky-scraping sword sect. Friend Ling Jianyu, why isn't your fellow sect members here yet? Seeing that the blood calamity beast had already reached the Golden Spring Mountain, Yuan Qing glanced at the talkative beast cultivator and asked, when the blood calamity beast crosses the mountain and enters the forest of the Golden Spring Mountain, the disciples of the Golden Spring Mountain will come out. When that time comes, the Golden Core cultivator will definitely come out. Do you want to accept the challenge? Of course I will accept the challenge. Ling Yunwu laughed coldly. I will definitely make up for my own mistakes. Up to you. Yuan Qing expressed that he did not feel any pressure. But Ling Yunwu once again looked anxiously in the direction of the Soaring Wind Sword sect. A few days had already passed. There was no reason for his fellow sect members to not be here. Moreover, if he was alone, he really did not have the confidence to capture that terrifying phoenix. Outside the Golden Spring mountain range, there was an orderly attack. But Tu Hong of the Golden Spring Mountain could no longer sit still. Facing the light screen in front of the triangular magic tool, he asked in disbelief, Old Brother Lon, this beast, what is it? How come this old man has never heard of it before? This old man is also ignorant and inexperienced. Lon Xen ruefully smiled and then explained, there are many beast cultivators in the sword domain. It isn't strange for strange spirit beasts to appear. It's not strange that it's strange, but there are so many strange spirit beasts that I find strange. Tu Hong said with a bitter taste in his mouth. He did not send out the disciples of the Golden Spring Mountain or the Dao sect because he wanted to use the thick layer of earth on top of the Golden Spring Mountain's defensive array formation as a layer of defense. This would waste the strength of the sword cultivators and beast cultivators, and when they were tired, the cultivators would rush out and take advantage of the situation. But now, it seemed that Tu Hong's calculations were wrong. Moreover, facing so many spirit beasts, facing so many sword cultivators, after this battle, even if the Golden Spring Mountain won, it would still be a bloodbath. And this was only what Tu Hong saw through the magic tool. If he knew that there were still dozens of illusory swordsmen that had yet to arrive, he might not even have any thoughts of winning. Chapter 2337. Peng Peng. The orderly footsteps that shook the entire ground stopped. It was the thousands of blood calamity beasts that stopped and arrived at the foot of the Golden Spring Mountain. Not all of the blood calamity beasts had a beast cultivator on their backs. However, when a beast cultivator on a blood calamity beast patted the blood calamity beast below him, the surrounding blood calamity beasts all stopped and pointed the black holes on their faces at the stone wall. Obviously, this stone wall was nothing in the eyes of the blood calamity beasts. However, the sword cultivators behind the blood calamity beasts did not give them a chance to show off. Seeing that the blood calamity beasts had stopped, 3 sword cultivators flew to the blood calamity beasts in a group. When the blood calamity beasts saw the sword cultivators approaching, they raised their heads and roared. The black holes on their faces also turned towards the sword cultivators. Hiss! The beast cultivators on the blood calamity beasts pursed their lips and let out a strange hiss. It was like the hiss of a poisonous snake in the grass. When they heard the hiss, all of the blood calamity beasts quietened down and lowered their heads. Rise! The 3 sword cultivators flew below the blood calamity beasts and stretched out their hands to support the blood calamity beasts. They roared in unison, and the huge blood calamity beasts slowly flew up towards the top of Jin Quan Mountain. Hee, these little fellows. They actually have to form a group of 3. They really lack cultivation. Yuan Qing watched from afar and commented with a smile, "If it was me back then, I would be able to carry a blood calamity beast up the mountain." Of course, which of the swordsmen of Senior Yuan's generation did not train hard? They fought against soul cultivators in the snowy highlands? They are definitely not something that the younger generation can compare to. Fatty Li Min smiled apologetically and said, "Of course, the swordsmen of your sect are also very good. It's all because our disciples are useless and cannot bring these spiritual beasts up the mountain." They actually want to use this layer of soil to block my sword cultivator's attack? The cultivators of the Dao sect really know how to dream. Ing Chao squinted his eyes and saw that his disciples were all in the air. He knew that the cultivators of Jin Quan Mountain were all hiding under the soil. Naturally, he could guess Tu Hong's plan. However, Ling Yunwu was a little distracted. Until now, the disciples of the Wind Sword sect had not arrived. Something must have happened. At that moment, the bird cultivators in the sky became a little disorganized. Ing Chao frowned when he realized that something was wrong. However, before he could frown, the bird cultivators quieted down again. In the direction of the Huan nation, a dozen small dots flew over from afar. "Hee, young friend Ling, your senior brothers are here." Ing Chao glanced around and a divine light flashed in his eyes. He had already seen the black dot clearly. He turned his head and smiled at Ling Yunwu. "All right." Although Ling Yunwu could not see it clearly, he still nodded and smiled. "If that's the case, my sword cultivator will definitely be able to take down Quan Jin Shan. There are more than 10 illusory swordsmen. If we still can't take down Quan Jin Shan, our reputation as sword cultivators will be ruined by the Ling Feng sword sect," Yuan Qing said with a fake smile. Don't worry, Senior Yuan. I'm only looking for that golden core cultivator. As for anything else, I won't ask," Ling Yunwu said with a smile. Yuan Qing seemed to be nodding, but he did not seem to have heard it. His voice was extremely soft, as if he did not care at all. When the illusory swordsman landed on the ground, Ling Yunwu's expression changed drastically. Thousands of blood calamity beasts once again lined up in a row and slowly pushed forward. In the blink of an eye, the lush green pines and cypresses were turned into wood shavings and scattered across the soil. If the Dao sect cultivators were not scared out of their wits by our huge attack, then their brains must have been damaged by their so-called magic arts. Yuan Qing's figure stopped in midair as he squinted his eyes and coldly said, "Even if the soil of Jin Quan Mountain is very thick and even very hard, under the huge palms of the blood calamity beast, it will be destroyed sooner or later. If they don't come out to fight now, could it be that they are waiting until—" Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, a loud rumbling sound could be heard from the forest of Jin Quan Mountain. The entire mountain range shook and many blood calamity beasts lost their balance and fell to the ground. The beast cultivators on their backs also fell to the ground. In an instant, the neat formation of the blood calamity beasts became messy. Many blood calamity beasts even fled in fear. If they were not stepping on the fallen blood calamity beasts, they were stepping on the fallen beast cultivators. It was a complete mess. Fatty Li Min's face was filled with panic as he hurriedly smiled apologetically. "Senior Ing, this is the bad thing about the blood calamity beasts. They are too cowardly and will flee at the slightest sign of danger. And quickly go and pacify them." Ing Chao lightly nodded his head. "Even if the Dao sect cultivators come out, we will have swordsmen in the air to welcome them. Beast cultivators only need to destroy the soil layer." Yes, Junior will go right now." Li Min wiped the sweat off his face as he hurriedly flew into midair. With a clap of his hand, a fist-sized drum appeared. Then he reached into his chest and took out a long white bone. Without hesitation, he hit the drum on the drum. Chapter 23:38. Boom! All the blood calamity beasts that were running around in a panic were stunned. They stood there, not daring to move at all. Dong dong, Li Min knocked twice again. The blood calamity beast began to slowly move to its original position. The blood calamity beast and the beast cultivator disciples who were lying on the ground struggled for a while before they stood up. Dong dong dong. Li Min began to beat the drum rhythmically. The blood calamity beasts began to move forward again. Looking at the forest again, there were dozens of places where the mana started to fluctuate. The surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth started to gather. Wang sounds could be heard from dozens of places. Following that, an earthen yellow light appeared. Dozens and hundreds of teams of Golden Spring Mountain disciples and cultivators from the three kingdoms flew out from the light. When the cultivators flew out, they did not stop. They immediately activated the weapons in their hands and smashed them at the blood calamity beasts. These cultivators could not hold back anymore. They even crawled out from their turtle shells. When Yuan Qing saw this, he almost laughed out loud. He pointed his finger and the flying sword under his feet shone with sword light. He had the urge to give it a try. The sword cultivators in the sky who had been on guard all this time naturally reacted to Yuan Qing's thoughts. When they saw the abnormality on the ground, they immediately activated their sword energy. Sword lights of different colors shot towards the ground like fireworks. Even though the sword cultivators' flying swords were fast, they were not as close as the cultivators to the blood calamity beasts. Before the thousands of flying swords could reach half of them, the Dao sect cultivators' weapons had already hit the blood calamity beasts. Roar! Seeing the many weapons flying towards them and tearing apart the dense spiritual chi of heaven and earth around the forest, the blood calamity beasts that were attacked by the weapons roared angrily. The black holes above their heads spat out a thin liquid as they tried their best to defend themselves. However, the cultivator's magic artifact easily dodged the liquid, which was nothing special, and quickly smashed into the blood calamity beast. The blood calamity beasts were huge and it was not easy to dodge. However, when the weapons hit them, the blood calamity beasts' bodies swelled up as if they were inflated. Puff, 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 a series of sounds could be heard. The Dharma artifact had struck the blood calamity beast. To everyone's surprise, the ferocious-looking blood calamity beast only had a frightening body. No matter how big or small the cultivator's magic treasures were, they all pierced through the blood calamity beast's skin and entered its body. Then, the Dharma artifact appeared from the other side of the blood calamity beast's body, dripping with blood. Roar! The injured blood calamity beast roared and its huge body slowly fell to the ground. Blood continuously flowed out from the bloody hole. Looking at the blood calamity beasts that were not attacked by the Dharma artifact, they panicked and scattered in all directions, trying to escape. Ing Chao, who had an extremely ugly expression on his face, came to a realization when he heard the roars that rose and fell throughout the entire mountain range. These roars were not angry roars, but the roars of fear and panic from the blood calamity beast. Li Min, why is this blood disaster beast so weak? Ing Chao could not help but look at Li Min, who was about to fly up into the sky. Fatty Li Min's face was already dripping with sweat and his expression was extremely ugly. He laughed bitterly. Eldering, this is how the blood calamity beast is. I have already told Elder Yuan about it before I came here. Sigh. Yuan Qing sighed and laughed bitterly. Of course I know about it. But when I saw how huge the blood calamity beast is, no matter what, it should have some defensive power. But I did not expect it to be so weak. If the blood calamity beast's defensive power was any stronger, I am afraid we would have already known about this spiritual beast's name. Another beast cultivator said thoughtfully. I will go and pacify the blood calamity beast. Li Min had already flown up and the small drum in his hand appeared again. Yuan Qing also said, I will go too. This blood calamity beast is the key to attacking Jinshan Quan. We cannot lose it. I will lead the swordsmen to protect the blood calamity beast. The cultivators of Jinshan Quan were stunned. They did not expect the blood calamity beast to be killed so easily. But, before they could use their Dharma artifacts to attack the other blood calamity beasts, the flying swords of the sword cultivators had already flown above their heads. The cultivators hurriedly threw out their yellow talismans and activated their Dharma artifacts, wanting to block the flying swords of the sword cultivators. At this moment, the strength of different cultivators could be seen. Those who were prepared and had abundant Dharma artifacts and had good control over their Dharma artifacts, when the yellow talismans were used to block the sharpness of the flying swords, their Dharma artifacts were like venomous snakes, showing their viciousness. They swayed their Dharma artifacts, absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to attack the flying swords. Not to mention the lotus flowers, which were the Dharma artifacts of a Kunlun sect female cultivator, blocking the flying swords that streaked across the sky like lightning between the lotus leaves. Not to mention the green clouds in the morning, which gave birth to the vitality of the day and night, which were the Dharma artifacts of a foundation establishment middle stage cultivator from Qiqiao sect, which wrapped around the flying swords that were like the scorching sun in the sky. Not to mention the jade snake, which was the Dharma artifacts of a foundation establishment early stage cultivator from Taiqing sect, which bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it rushed into the air, swallowing the flying swords that were like pitch-black pellets but were condensed with extremely sharp sword intent. However, a ardent Fire Mountain disciple wearing a blood-red Taoist robe saw that he did not have time to activate his Dharma artifact. His eyebrows furrowed and he raised his hand. The blood-red Taoist robe flew away from his body and turned into a blood cloud above his head, blocking the two flying swords that were about to pierce his head. This was enough to make Yuan Qing, who was flying in the air, feel astonished. The attacks of sword cultivators had always been sharp and incisive. It was the pride of sword cultivators and also the reason why sword cultivators looked down on other cultivators. However, at this moment, the outstanding performance of the Dao sect cultivators made Yuan Qing feel astonished. However, in just a few breaths, waves of heart-wrenching screams rose and fell in the forest. Yuan Qing's divine sense swept over and the corners of his mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. Among the thousands of cultivators that suddenly appeared, only 20% of them made Yuan Qing look at them in a new light. After blocking the sharp flying swords of the sword cultivators, they immediately counterattacked, killing the sword cultivators at the same time as clouds of blood mist appeared. There were also cultivators in the surroundings who were barely able to block the flying swords of the sword cultivators and had to activate their Dharma artifacts and Dharma artifacts in preparation for a counterattack. As for the remaining 40% of cultivators, they were in a disadvantageous position. Not to mention being flustered, even if they activated their Dharma chi to cast spells or activated their Dharma artifacts, they were like paper in front of the various flying swords of the sword cultivators. Most of the screams that rose and fell in the forest came from the mouths of these cultivators. Blossoms of blood were comparable to the sunset, dyeing the sky and the forest red. Lives were comparable to mayflies, only revealing themselves for a moment before falling into the abyss. Chapter 2339. Dong dong dong. Fatty Li Min's small drum sounded again. Instead of saying that it was a secret skill that he used to pacify the blood calamity beast, it was more appropriate to say that he was pacifying the hundreds of sword cultivators and cultivators who had lost their lives during the battle. The blood calamity beast gradually calmed down, but its eyes were filled with excitement. The blood-red color that flashed across the entire forest was provoking the blood calamity beast's desire. Rumble, pung, pungs, pung, all kinds of sounds and brilliance flashed on the battlefield. Corpses and fresh blood became the main melody in the eyes of the cultivators and swordsmen. Wang, seeing that the swordsmen had gained the upper hand and the beast cultivators swooped down from the sky, the forest emitted an earthy yellow light, and waves of spiritual power appeared. The cultivators who had been fighting hard finally relaxed. They formed a spell with their hands, and with a flash of light, all of them disappeared into the ground. Of course, at this moment, there were still dozens of cultivators who could not dodge the sword cultivators' flying swords, and their corpses were left in the forest. Roar, the blood calamity beasts that had lost a portion of their lives were suddenly excited. They leaped up and rushed toward the corpses that were scattered all over the ground. Blood-red tentacles extended out from the black holes on their faces. These tentacles had jagged protrusions that were about an inch long. These tentacles wrapped around the bloody corpses, and with a slight twitch, the blood calamity beasts tore off large chunks of flesh from the corpses, and with a slight flip, they were thrown into the black holes of the blood calamity beasts. Quick! Stop it! Yuan Qing was furious. Among the corpses, most of them were cultivators, but there were also many sword cultivators. He could not allow the blood calamity beasts to feast on the corpses. Fatty Li Min wiped off the sweat on his forehead again, and his hands quickly hit the small drum. The sonorous sound of the drum resounded across the battlefield. When the blood calamity beasts heard the sound of the drum, they were first agitated, but then they gradually calmed down. However, the blood that filled the battlefield spread in the mouths and minds of the blood calamity beasts. Gradually, the blood overwhelmed the sound of the drum, and the blood calamity beasts became agitated again and rushed toward the corpses. Damn it! Yuan Qing was furious. He waved his hand and a green sword gleam flashed. Two blood disaster beasts that were devouring the sword cultivator's corpse fell to the ground. However, there were more blood calamity beasts than corpses to begin with. As soon as the two blood calamity beasts fell to the ground, the other three blood calamity beasts rushed over and continued to devour the corpses. Yuan Qing waved his hand again, and the three blood calamity beasts fell to the ground again. The 5 blood calamity beast corpses blocked the 2 sword cultivator corpses, and no other blood calamity beast charged forward. However, there were more than 5 blood calamity beasts on the battlefield. How could the corpse of a sword cultivator be the only one on the ground? Moreover, the swordsmen's corpses were piled up together with the cultivators' corpses, and it was hard to tell them apart. The blood calamity beasts tore the corpses apart, and the swordsmen's eyes were filled with blood. Although they were used to seeing blood, many of them were still pale and could not help but vomit. There were also dozens of swordsmen who saw Yuan Qing attacking, and they waved their flying swords to kill the blood calamity beasts. However, after killing a few blood calamity beasts, they realized that it was futile. Just as they were about to think of another way, Fatty Li Min's drumming stopped. Immediately, a fiery red ray of light shot out from the magic tool and rushed to all sides of the cave, disappearing without a trace. "Great General, do we still want to attack?" Lan Xen nearly cried out in alarm. "Many of the disciples haven't rested yet, and I fear that they haven't even taken pills yet. How can we attack now? I am inferior to you when it comes to managing the internal affairs of Mount Quanjin. But when it comes to fighting, you are inferior to me." Tu Hong's eyes were cold as he looked at the curtain of light. He faintly replied, "At this time, the blood calamity beasts are eating. Presumably, it won't be long before they become 100 times more energetic. My Mount Quanjin will soon be broken through by them. Moreover, the sword cultivators are saving their corpses. This is the best time to sneak attack them. My Mount Quanjin has fewer cultivators than the sword cultivators that came to attack, so we are at a disadvantage. If we don't attack now, when will we?" Also, the blood calamity beasts are tearing apart the corpses of my Dao sect cultivators. When my Dao sect disciples see this, how can they not kill these spirit beasts? Tu Hong's eyes twitched as he spoke. Yes, Lan Xian's face was filled with extreme helplessness. But she couldn't help but admit that what Tu Hong said was indeed reasonable. Sure enough, even the sword cultivators and bird cultivators would never have thought that the cultivators that had just escaped would suddenly appear. They were caught off guard, and in several breaths of time, even more sword cultivators fell. At the same time, another 20% of the blood calamity beasts fell into pools of their own blood. Kill! The Dao sect cultivators saw their fellow Daoists that had been full of vigor and vitality a moment ago, but now they had all died miserable deaths and had become food for the spirit beasts. Their eyes were already red with envy. Even if they were to be injured, they would still kill these evil beasts that disturbed the peace of the dead. Chapter 2340. Seeing that the formation of the sword cultivators was a little messy, Yuan Qing transmitted his voice loudly. Disciples who are pregnant with swords snatch the corpses of the swordsmen. Disciples who are drawing their swords kill the cultivators. This sentence woke up the swarm of sword cultivators. In less than 10 minutes, the situation on the battlefield was reversed and the sword cultivators gained the upper hand again. Fortunately, at this moment, the cultivators' formation lit up again and brought the cultivator, whose magic power had been depleted, into the formation. Seeing that the cultivators were defeated, the sword cultivators moved again. Half of the sword cultivators stood on their flying swords and stared at the ground with bright eyes, guarding against the sneak attack of the cultivators. The other half of the sword cultivators rushed into the group of blood calamity beasts and snatched the corpses of the fallen swordsmen. Sigh! Ying Chao stood straight in the air and his face was expressionless. However, there was a hint of sympathy in his eyes as he sighed. I just came into contact with the cultivators and this battle has turned out like this. This is really beyond my expectations. The battle is not something that we can compare to. Yuan Qing looked at the pool of blood on the ground and said coldly, even if we were to enter with the cultivation of the illusory sword, there is a possibility of death. However, this situation has indeed exceeded our expectations. But what is the result? The warriors of the sword region far surpass the cultivators of the Dao sect. If we can't kill the cultivators, how can we face our elders? Ying Chao laughed coldly. When we break through the defense of Mount Quanjin, I will bathe Mount Quanjin in blood. In the next 4 hours, the cultivators of the Dao sect did not come and the blood calamity beasts were full. Under the command of the beast cultivators of the Maze Valley, they raised their huge palms and continued to break through the forest of Mount Quanjin. The corpses of the cultivators that were not swallowed turned into blood under their feet and seeped into the ground. All the sword cultivators were flying in the air and their eyes were filled with anger and hatred. They looked at the blood calamity beasts and the ground of Mount Quanjin. The sword radiance around them was breathing and expanding and contracting from time to time. They were deliberately preparing to welcome the cultivators' attack. The corpses of cultivators and swordsmen were piled up under the blood calamity beasts' feet. How could they tell the difference when they stepped on the blood at the same time? The tentacles in the blood calamity beast's black hole were strange as well. Just one of them was enough to tear the flesh of several corpses apart. Even though the swordsman was fast and the bird cultivator's eyesight was sharp, they still couldn't tell. Therefore, only the disciples who were pregnant with swords managed to snatch dozens of intact corpses of the swordsmen. The rest had all turned into meat paste and blended together with the corpses of the cultivators and the black soil. Needless to say, even if the blood disaster beast completely destroyed the forest, this place would definitely become a thriving place in the next year or the year after that. Perhaps, the cycle of prosperity and decline, the cycle of life and death, was between destruction and rebirth? As the blood calamity beast pushed forward inch by inch, the color of the forest gradually faded away, revealing the snow-covered ground. However, the passageway that Xiao Hua and the rest used to enter the underground was not revealed, as it had already been destroyed by the disciples of Jinshan Mountain. Great General, what should we do now? Lan Xen frowned as she watched the blood disaster beast destroy the forest. This sword cultivator actually destroyed the entire forest of Jinshan Mountain. It seems that they have the intention of completely taking over Jinshan Mountain. Tu Hong was also in an extremely difficult position. It wasn't that he didn't have a backup plan, but this was just the beginning. This blood disaster beast didn't have any attack power, and yet he had to take out such a powerful backup plan. If the sword cultivator made another move, wouldn't he have no strength to fight back? Tu Hong's eyebrows tightened, as if they were twisted together. He waved his hand and sneered, "The sword cultivator has the blood disaster beast, but my Dao sect has the mortal body of a cultivator. Now that things have reached this point, there is no need to speak of mercy or tolerance. Even if you are not a disciple of my Jinshan Mountain, you should still have the awareness that you will perish here." Lan Xian nodded. Just as she was about to speak, there was some movement outside the cave. "Who is it?" Tu Hong's face was as cold as ice. He waved his hand and a brilliant light shot towards the cave entrance. Immediately, several cultivators rushed into the cave, accompanied by a Jinshan Mountain disciple. "Great General!" The disciple's face was filled with panic. He nervously said, This subordinate was unable to... It was these Rocky Border sect fellow Taoists that forced this subordinate. Humph, these Rocky Border sect disciples don't know the rules of my Jinshan Mountain, but you do. Tu Hong coldly said, "What is the crime of trespassing into the commander's tent during a great battle?" The disciple's face was ashen. But at this time, he stiffened his neck and replied, "Reporting to the great general, this subordinate understands. During a great battle, trespassing into the commander's tent is punishable by death." As long as you know." Tu Hong nodded, "Then you should know what to do." "Yes, this subordinate understands." The disciple bowed and turned to leave. Senior 2. A middle foundation establishment cultivator leading the group coldly said, "We came to reinforce Jinshan Mountain, but we didn't come to watch Senior 2 and his subordinates put on a show." "What business do you have?" Tu Hong lightly asked, not bothering to explain. "We Dao sect disciples came to Jinshan Mountain as reinforcements because we were prepared to put our lives on the line. However, if we were to die in Jinshan Mountain, our corpses must be left behind and brought back to Rocky Border sect. But what about Senior 2's actions? Other sword cultivators still know to send disciples to retrieve the corpses of their fallen disciples. But the corpses of our Dao sect cultivators were left on the ground for no reason. Not only did they not retrieve them, they were trampled on by the giant beast and were even eaten alive by the giant beast. Senior 2, such a method, isn't it chilling the hearts of our reinforcements? Are you waiting for me to finish?" Tu Hong nodded and asked. "Also, the yellow talismans on our bodies, although we can enter and exit the array, if the array is not opened, we can't enter the array at all. How is this different from not having any yellow talismans? If the array is not opened, wouldn't we have to fight the sword cultivators to the death? Is there anything else?" Tu Hong still nodded. At this moment, a deep voice sounded, "Reporting to the great general, the disciples who violated the military order have been beheaded." "Bring it in." Tu Hong's eyebrows did not raise as he casually replied. Following the sound of that voice, a wave of firm footsteps came in. A robust chi refining cultivator walked in with a vermilion-painted board in his hand. On the board was a large head. It was none other than the foundation establishment cultivator who went out to receive punishment. Seeing that the blood on the board had yet to dry and the two eyes on the head had yet to close, the Rocky Border sect disciples could not help but exclaim. They did not expect that Tu Hong was actually serious. Chapter 2341. Brother! Tu Hong stepped forward and bowed deeply. He stretched out his right hand and slowly placed it on his head. "This too is untalented and can only bring you to this point. From now on, you have to walk your own path." Following Tu Hong's right hand, his head was filled with hatred. He hated that he couldn't die on the battlefield and closed his eyes. "Senior 2, there's no need to do this. The leader of the rock border sect disciples said with regret, "This fellow Taoist was forced to come here by us." Tu Hong suddenly turned his head and swept his gaze across the disciples. Even the middle stage foundation establishment disciples were startled. A layer of goosebumps appeared on their bodies and they almost took half a step back. Their true essence flowed rapidly as if guarding against Tu Hong. But Tu Hong didn't make any move. He waved his hand and said, "Take this brother's head and bury it with his corpse. Then tell those who want to go out and snatch their brother's corpse that it's a small matter to snatch the corpse, but it's a big matter to protect Jin Quan Mountain. No matter where our brother's corpse is, our heart is to bury them in their graves." Yes, this subordinate understands. The Chi refinement disciples' tiger-like eyes glistened with tears. Also, Tu Hong raised his head and said, "If this Tu falls here, you all must not collect my corpse. Let this Tu's flesh and blood coexist with this Jin Quan Mountain." The Chi refinement disciple puffed out his chest and said loudly. He turned around and left. After watching the Chi refining disciple leave, the disciples of the Rocky Border sect looked at each other in dismay. Although they had thought of many countermeasures and hypothesized many of Tu Hong's actions, but this move was something they could never have imagined even in their wildest dreams. Immediately, the leader of the Rock Border sect disciples bowed and said, "Senior Tu, this junior was wrong. This is really a big mistake. Please punish us." As soon as he said this, the other disciples hurriedly bowed and shouted, "This junior was wrong, please punish us." Tu Hong's face that was always calm like water had a trace of a smile. He walked steadily to the front of the disciples and reached out to help them up. He said, "You are wrong, but you are also not wrong. The fault lies in the fact that sword cultivators invaded my country of Shi and stepped into the territory of my Sky Patrol city." Seeing that Tu Hong had no intention of killing them, the disciples of the Rock Border sect felt relieved and smiled apologetically. "Although all of you are in the wrong, but all of you are not my Spring Gene Mountains disciples, and do not understand my Spring Gene Mountains military rules. This is also my fault." The smile on Tu Hong's face gradually disappeared, and he continued, "Those who don't know can't be blamed, even in my Quanjin Mountain. Now that we're in the middle of a war, this old man won't say anything unnecessary. Go and guard the formation well. Act according to this old man's orders. If anyone slacks off on the military rules, this old man won't show any mercy." Yes, this junior understands. The hearts of several Rock Border sect disciples trembled as they bowed in salute. "Someone come, bring back the fellow Taoists who came as reinforcements." Lon Exine hurriedly shouted out. After the patrolling disciples took away the several Rocky Edge faction disciples, Lon Exine looked at Tu Hong and then stared at the light screen. She said in a soft voice, "Like this, the cultivators of the various sects should be able to calm down. But how many illusory swordsmen have come? If there are too many, then my Spring Gene Mountains array formation won't be able to block them." It was as if what happened just now was nothing more than an ordinary scene. The lives of the Spring Gene Mountain disciples were like duckweeds floating in the wild. According to this old man's estimate, there shouldn't be more than 5 illusory swordsmen. According to the intelligence, there shouldn't be more than 4 sword sects attacking Spring Gene Mountain, and each sword sect should have an illusory sword. They shouldn't have come out in full force. Tu Hong didn't care about this. He sneered. In fact, this old man would rather have more sword cultivators come. The more illusory swordsmen there are, this old man will become more famous. Although Lon Exine didn't understand Tu Hong's plan, she still replied, "What this old man is worried about is that Yu Meng and the others have been gone for a long time and there still hasn't been any news from them. I don't know if they've reached Sky Patrol City yet." As he spoke of Yu Meng, Tu Hong's face revealed a trace of worry. The sword cultivator's attention is all on the Spirit Stone Mine. They won't be distracted by any random cultivators. "Lord General, please rest assured." What could Lon Exine say? She could only comfort Tu Hong. What about the other disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect? Lon Exine seemed to think of something. She asked with some doubt, I don't think I've seen them go out to meet the enemy. Ah. Tu Hong didn't answer. He pointed at the light screen and said, "The giant beasts are tired. Should we attack them again?" What the Lord General says is right. This is the best time to kill these giant beasts. Lan Xian tactfully didn't mention it again. It was as if the disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect had already died. The disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect naturally wouldn't die. They followed the instructions in the Jade Slip and entered the tunnel. Then, they flew along the spacious tunnel. However, after flying for a moment, the tunnel turned downwards and they flew along several forks. Luckily, the Jade Slip was marked so Cui Hongshan wasn't afraid of getting lost. He picked one of the paths and continued down. After flying like this for the time it took to eat a meal, they arrived at a large abandoned cave. Oh! Xiaohua's eyes swept over the cave, a bit surprised in his heart. It was obvious that there were many exits in the cave. Not only that, but the inside of the cave was filled with dim bright flower stones. In the shadows where the light couldn't reach, there were several small thumb-sized spirit stones scattered about. This was definitely a spirit stone mine that had been excavated a long time ago. "It's here." Cui Hongshan looked at the Jade Slip and waved his hand. "Let's sit down according to the formation we comprehended before. I will wait for Senior 2's instructions. We will stimulate our magic power and support the array formation with the disciples of Goldspring Mountain and the other disciples." It's here?" Xiaohua almost wanted to hold his stomach and laugh out loud. This was already the depths of the spirit stone mine. The surrounding soil layer was extremely dense and his divine sense couldn't reach too far. However, although he couldn't see too far, Xiaohua would be the first to not believe that this was just a corner of the array formation and that the disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect could transmit their magic power to the ground from here. "And it's here." Cui Hongshan saw the disdain on Xiaohua's face and secretly frowned. Then he said arrogantly, "This is just a corner of Goldspring Mountain's defensive array formation. Naturally, it's hidden. If you don't understand, then don't say any more. We will follow Senior 2's instructions, and just move." Xiaohua saw that everyone had sat down. It was actually an ordinary array formation planning method. He blinked his eyes and flew up again. "Xiaohua, what are you doing?" Cui Hongshan immediately shouted. "Xiaohua will look around." Xiaohua didn't stop and immediately flew towards one of the passages above the cave. Chapter 2342. Cui Hongshan clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "Xiaohua, I know that your cultivation is high and your strength is comparable to early gold core. However, this is a battle with a sword cultivator. Even a true gold core cultivator like Senior Tu Hong wouldn't dare to be careless. They all have to focus on the arrangement of troops, focus on the group battle, focus on the array to defend against the enemy. You have to look at the big picture." Cui Hongshan's voice became softer and softer. Because Xiaohua had already flown away, who could he say it to? Sigh. Cui Hongshan felt somewhat powerless. Seeing that the other 5 Imperial Thunder Sect disciples were all sitting obediently with their eyes closed, he also sighed and sat down. Cui Hongshan wanted to calm his heart and regulate his breathing. However, no matter what, he couldn't enter the ethereal state. Helpless, he could only open his eyes. However, when he opened his eyes, he almost jumped up in fright. He saw Xiaohua's slender face swaying in front of his eyes. "When did you return?" Cui Hongshan asked in shock. "I came a long time ago." Xiaohua said weakly, "I have already looked around. Don't talk about other sect disciples, there isn't even an ant. What do you think we should do?" "What should we do?" "Naturally we should wait." Cui Hongshan said without hesitation. "This place is under the Spirit Stone Mine. It has nothing to do with the defensive array of Golden Spring Mountain." Xiaohua said angrily, "Look at the Jade Scroll yourself. Did you make a mistake?" "This." Cui Hongshan took out the Jade Scroll doubtfully. He looked at it again and then handed it to Xiaohua. "I didn't make a mistake. Why don't you look at it yourself?" "I'm not looking." Xiaohua turned his head and said, "Senior brother Minghui, look again." Cui Hongshan ignored Xiao Hua and handed the jade scroll to Zhen Minghui. When Zhen Minghui looked carefully, Cui Hongshan asked with interest, Xiao Hua, how do you know that this is under the spirit stone mine? I just know. What about it? Xiao Hua said disdainfully. Have you been here before? Cui Hongshan narrowed his eyes and looked at Xiao Hua. What? Did Ming Mao tell you about this? Xiao Hua asked. Ming Mao never told me. But this Cui can guess. Cui Hongshan secretly despised in his heart a rogue cultivator as expected of a rogue cultivator. You don't have to care whether this Xiao came here or not. Think about it. Why did Tu Hong suddenly want to transfer 3 female disciples of my Imperial Thunder sect away from Golden Spring Mountain? Furthermore, he placed us here? What are his intentions? Xiao Hua asked. Senior Tu Hong is a golden core cultivator and he is in charge of Golden Spring Mountain. He is a dignified and magnanimous person. Yes, it can even be said that he has a good command over his army. He is a role model for us cultivators to emulate. Cui Hongshan held Tu Hong in high esteem and said with a smile, what could he possibly covet about the disciples of my Imperial Thunder sect? If there's anything, it's that he's taking pity on the juniors and transferring Qi Meng and the others back to Sky Patrol City. He's taking care of their lives and placing us under the spirit stone vein to prevent us from fighting against sword cultivators. This. Xiao Hua was also speechless. What Cui Hongshan said was indeed reasonable. He couldn't say anything to refute it. However, Xiao Hua didn't believe that Senior Tu Hong, whom he had never met before, would be so kind. Fellow Taoist Cui, is this Senior Tu your relative? Xiao Hua suddenly realized. Nonsense. Cui Hongshan said coldly, this is the first time I've seen him at Golden Spring Mountain. I've never seen him before. Furthermore, don't make any dirty guesses. Senior Tu Hong's character is noble and pure. It's not something you can measure. Xiao Hua looked at Cui Hongshan and almost thought that he was Tu Hong's illegitimate son. Junior brother Xiao. At this moment, Zhen Minghui said, Captain Cui is right. We should be waiting for orders here. Alright. Xiao Hua stretched and threw a message talisman. Since you believe so much, then you can wait here. If you have any orders, fellow Taoist Cui can call me back at any time. After saying that, Xiao Hua's figure swayed and flew towards the cave entrance. What are you going to do? Cui Hongshan said anxiously as he took the message talisman. I'm sleepy. I'm going to have a wet dream. Xiao Hua's voice came from the cave entrance. This bastard. Seeing Xiao Hua leave, Cui Hongshan was furious, but he also felt like he had lost something to rely on. He could only pinch the message talisman, hoping that Xiao Hua wouldn't fool him. This is clearly below the jade essence. If I hadn't passed by here before, how would I know? Xiao Hua left the cave and flew for a while. Looking at the familiar tunnel, he made a hand seal and entered the stone wall, heading towards the jade essence again. Time was tight and the mission was difficult. Xiao Hua had to take advantage of the fact that the sword cultivators hadn't reached here and excavate as many jade essences as possible. He definitely couldn't leave any extra jade essences for the sword cultivators. This was Xiao Hua's only thought in this dangerous situation. Xiao Hua was so selfless, so considerate of the Dao sect's future. The day and night passed quickly. Everyone was working hard, whether it was the sword cultivators who were on guard in the air, the Dao sect cultivators who risked their lives to kill the blood calamity beasts, or even Xiao Hua who was excavating selflessly. Naturally, everyone's harvest was bountiful. Less than 10% of the blood calamity beasts were left, and they were far less imposing than before. Similarly, less than 30% of the Golden Spring Mountain forest had been destroyed by the blood calamity beasts, and a piece of flat soil was revealed from the forest. The sword cultivators understood at a glance that this place had been tampered with by the Dao sect. However, the soil was drenched in blood and flesh, and a bloody stench permeated the mountain range. Amidst this bloody stench, there was a strange sense of sorrow. Enough! Yuan Qing waved his hand and said to Li Min with satisfaction, Take away all the blood calamity beasts in your Confusion Valley. They are the foundation of your Confusion Valley. If they are all consumed by us, what will happen to your Confusion Valley in the future? However, Li Min shook his head and said sincerely, Senior Yuan, I have already said that these blood calamity beasts have eaten the flesh of our warriors. They cannot be allowed to exist in this world. If Senior Yuan feels that these blood calamity beasts are no longer of any use, I will instruct my disciples to kill all these blood calamity beasts. Leave none alive. Valley Masterly. Ing Chao laughed. The blood calamity beasts are just stupid beasts without intelligence. How can they resist their natural appetite? Just now, your words have already made your intentions clear. We from the Sword region will definitely not blame these blood calamity beasts and your Confusion Valley. Don't worry. Yes, that's right. Yuan Qing nodded. These blood calamity beasts are also one of the great contributors in this battle. We do not have any rewards, so those can be considered as offsetting. Yes, I understand. Li Min nodded. Do we need to destroy the remaining 30% of the forest? Yes, that's enough. Yuan Qing nodded. Take away the blood calamity beasts. I have other methods. Yes. When Li Min heard that, he flew up and raised the small drum in his hand once again. Then his left and right hands hit the drum. Instantly, a sonorous and powerful drum sound that was filled with sorrow, pity, reluctance, and even determination resounded through the entire Jin Quan Mountain. It was as if he was paying tribute to the souls of the swordsmen who had passed away earlier, so that they could continue on their journey. Oh, Ing Chao's heart sank when he heard that. He looked at Li Min in confusion. He saw that Li Min was hitting the drum with a pale face and tears in his eyes. Ing Chao immediately understood and looked at Yuan Qing. As expected, Yuan Qing was also enlightened. The two of them looked at each other and their eyes were filled with respect. They looked at the forest in front of Quanjin Mountain that had yet to be destroyed. Hundreds of blood calamity beasts sat down with the drum sound and bowed respectfully on the ground. Of the 10 blood calamity beasts that had been guarding the blood calamity beasts, there weren't many left. They leapt up from the backs of the blood calamity beasts and flew towards different blood calamity beasts. Every time they landed on a blood calamity beast, they would reach out and throw a fist-sized pill into its mouth. As each pill fell into the mouth of a blood calamity beast, that blood calamity beast would emit a low hiss and then lie down, motionless. Hiss. All of the swordsmen that were standing guard in the air also understood the actions of the Lost Valley. They couldn't help but feel a sense of respect in their hearts, and all of their previous thoughts vanished into thin air. Oh? Tu Hong's eyes also saw the situation on the light screen. His eyes flashed with a smile. He pointed a finger and said, It seems that the master of these blood calamity beasts is quite tactful. If he doesn't act decisively now, then after this battle, I fear that thousands of swordsmen will come knocking on his door. If he acts decisively today, there will be some losses, but he won't have any future burdens. He will also gain the respect of others. Yes, what the general says is true. Lan Xen nodded, but she was still puzzled. There's still 30% of the forest that hasn't been destroyed. Also, if my Golden Spring Mountains array formation isn't activated, then there should be several miles of earth covering it. Sword cultivators, there shouldn't be too many of them that choose to escape into the earth, right? Let's wait and see. Tu Hong waved his hand and looked back at the light screen. The sword cultivators didn't make Tu Hong wait for long. Yuan Qing stood in the air and turned to a tall old man. He smiled and said, Old brother Zhan, the rest is up to you. With Valley Master Li Min laying the groundwork, it will be much easier for my Wild Beast Villa. This old man was War Sword of Wild Beast Villa. I wouldn't dare. Li Min had already put away his small drum. He respectfully replied, This junior has long admired Senior War Sword of Wild Beast Villa. I will wait and see. Good. War Sword clapped his hands. Your Lost Valley's blood calamity beasts are indeed unexpected, but how can my Wild Beast Villa allow you to monopolize the limelight? Come, take a look at the methods of my Wild Beast Villa. As he spoke, the War Sword General waved his hand. Hundreds of Wild Beast Villa disciples, who were dressed in black and had their faces covered, who had been standing in the distance, flew up and flew towards the soil that the blood calamity beast had destroyed. Chapter 23:43. Once the hundreds of disciples had lined up, he reached into his bosom and took out a flat object which he placed in his mouth. Then he took out a black bag from his waist. When he opened the bag, a bunch of black objects flew out from the bag. When the crowd looked carefully, they saw that they were flying objects the size of a fist. The flying object looked like a gourd. It had a small head the size of a pinky finger and a round body the size of a fist. On both sides of the body, there were two 1-inch-long transparent wings. Wung wung. As the flying object flew out, the buzzing sound got louder and louder. Gradually, the pitch-black flying object had covered the entire sky above Jin Quan Mountain. Spirit? Spirit swallowing bugs? Li Min was shocked. How is this possible? Hee, of course it's impossible. Zhang Jian laughed. If our crazy beast mountain villa had so many spirit-swallowing bugs, would we need to sacrifice so many swordsmen? Yes, it's my fault. Li Min smiled apologetically. It seems that there are some differences between them and the spirit-swallowing bugs. It's more than just some differences. There's a huge difference. Zhang Jian laughed and did not explain further. He waved his hand and said, "Boy, release the earth-swallowing bugs and let them have some fun." Yes, the disciples of the crazy beast mountain villa puffed up their cheeks, but no sound was heard. The so-called earth-swallowing bugs split into different groups and pounced on the ground, covering the soil densely. Earth-swallowing bugs? Li Min understood. Hee, actually it's nothing. The battle sword looked at Ing Chao and said with a smile, "Thousands of years ago, my wild beast mountain villa obtained a secret method. I wanted to cultivate spirit-swallowing bugs, but I didn't manage to cultivate the spirit-swallowing bugs. Instead, I cultivated some useless things that can eat soil. We call them earth-swallowing bugs. These things are really useless. After all, they are the hard work of our crazy beast mountain villa for generations. We can't bear to destroy them." Previously, when we heard Senior Yuan mention that the spiritual stone mine in Jinquan Mountain was hidden underground, our villa master thought of this thing. Everything has its nemesis. Ing Chao laughed and said, "Exactly. Everything in the world is bound to be restrained by something." Yuan Qing also nodded. Then, as if he had thought of something, he said in a low voice, "Senior Ing, the head of the Xuanyan sect in the country of Xi is Fairy Ingzhua. Her name is the same as yours. Are you her natural nemesis? Let me see which day you've cursed me." Damn it, hearing Yuan Qing mention Fairy Ingzhua for no reason, a bitter smile appeared on Ing Chao's face. "I can't wait to jinx her one day. Even every day. But I can't compare to a nascent soul cultivator. That old woman sent me a message 100 years ago. Oh? There was such a thing? Could it be that she has taken a liking to you?" Yuan Qing's eyes lit up. "I don't like her." Ing Chao shook his head. "That old hag wants me to change my name." Haha, Yuan Qing laughed. Even Zhang Jian, Li Min, and the others couldn't help but smile. The earth-devouring insects lived up to their name. In just the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the several mu of land that was covered with spirit insects had clearly caved in. Good boy. These earth-devouring insects are actually so fierce. If these were real spirit-devouring insects, what would we do? Li Min whispered as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. Hee, Brother Li, this time you've made a mistake. Zhang Jian laughed. Although these insects are innately earth-devouring insects, they aren't as fierce as you see. Oh, Li Min suddenly realized, and this is the acid that the blood calamity beast spewed out. Exactly. Zhang Jian clapped his hands. Didn't I just say it? It's all because of your Maze Valley that I'm here. General, we can only accept the challenge. Lan Exen whispered from within Gold Spring Mountain. Tell this disciple to take out the earth-firm talisman that I've been refining for many years. Tu Hong nodded as he heard this. I already knew that this day would come. The earth-firm talisman is for today. Lan Exen nodded and hurried out. Tu Hong's eyes didn't leave the light screen. Although the earth-devouring insects were fierce and had already swallowed up over a foot of the earth, Tu Hong didn't seem to panic at all. Woo, between the layers of earth, there were flashes of brilliance. This was the sign that Gold Spring Mountain's disciples were about to attack. The sword cultivators that had been on guard all this time suddenly tightened their faces. They each urged their flying swords to attack the areas that they had already allocated. Kachacha. Instantly, the cultivators of Jin Shan sect appeared, and the flying swords of the sword cultivators also attacked. Magic tools and magic treasures clashed with each other, and following that, it was the clashing of the flesh and magic tools. The flesh and bones clashed with the flying swords. Of course, there were careful defenses, of course, there were quick dodges, but there were sharp weapons on all sides of the body, front and back were all ferocious. Even if one could dodge it once, how could one dodge it a second time? In just a moment, miserable screams sounded again. Everywhere, there were lives being reaped. Just as both sides were in the midst of a fierce battle, the layers of earth in the array flashed again. Hundreds of Gold Spring Mountain's disciples suddenly flew out from the array. As soon as they appeared on the battlefield, they didn't care about the other cultivators. Instead, they quickly flew towards the several acres of earth-devouring insects. Without waiting for Yuan Qing and the other sword cultivators to command, the sword cultivators that were extremely close to them immediately flew up to block them. However, this group of Gold Spring Mountain's disciples didn't even bother to fight. Their bodies flew extremely fast. Both of their hands slapped their storage bags and yellow talismans flew out. They turned into fist-sized balls of light that fell in the middle of the earth-devouring insects. "Quick, block them!" Yuan Qing and the others shouted. When the balls of light fell, the earth in the radius of a few feet immediately flashed with yellow brilliance. When the brilliance was slightly extinguished, it suddenly turned yellow as well. It was actually as hard as a piece of crystal. What shocked the sword cultivators the most was that when the yellow brilliance touched the earth-devouring insects, the earth-devouring insects also started to turn yellow. Following that, the earth-devouring insects stopped moving. It was completely similar to a fist-sized lump of earth. Not good. Zhang Jian was shocked. He anxiously transmitted his voice. The wild beast manners disciples who were protected by the swordsman immediately blew the soundless thing. The earth-devouring insects that weren't hit by the earth-hard talisman flapped their wings and wanted to escape. When the Gold Spring Mountain's disciples saw that the earth-hard talisman was effective, why would they let the earth-devouring insects escape? All of them waved their hands. They didn't hit the ground but directly hit the earth-devouring insects. Hundreds and thousands of yellow light balls exploded. Hundreds and thousands of earth-devouring insects turned into lumps of earth and fell to the ground. Chapter 2344. Tu Hong sat on a chair in the cave. This was the first time he had laughed so happily since the start of the battle. The heavens are really protecting my Dao sect. The heavens are really protecting my Golden Spring Mountain. That's right, this is a lucky hit. Lan Xen also smiled. Those spirit insects seem to be of the earth attribute. Since the earth firm talisman is effective against the earth layer, then it must be even more effective against the spirit insects. General, there is no need to worry about this battle. That's right. Tu Hong smiled as he sat on a chair. He waved his hand. Let the sword cultivators madly attack the earth layer. Once they are exhausted, we will kill our way out. General's plan is flawless. This old man truly admires you. Lan Xen was sincerely convinced. Quick, quick, the battle sword above the earth layer couldn't help but fly closer. He hurriedly urged his disciples to gather the earth-devouring insects and avoid the earth-firm talismans. Then his killing intent surged, and he began to kill the closest Golden Spring Mountain disciples. However, even before these Golden Spring Mountain disciples were killed, they still threw out all of their earth-firm talismans. They completely disregarded their own lives, truly facing death with equanimity. AI, seeing the Golden Spring Mountain disciples fall one by one, and the brilliance in the air gradually extinguished, there weren't many earth-devouring insects left. The battle sword sighed and looked at Yuan Qing. Yuan Qing was also stunned. He never thought that there would be such a turn of events. The joy he had when he was teasing nascent soul cultivators had long disappeared. Fellow sword cultivators, I'm afraid there is no way to break through this earth layer today. Yuan Qing turned to the several leading illusory swordsmen to discuss. How about we temporarily withdraw our troops? Once we have some method, we can come back and kill the cultivators? That's the only way. An illusory swordsman nodded. If we swordsmen clear the earth layer, I'm afraid we will fall into the cultivator's trap. All right, Yuan Qing nodded. Just as he was about to wave his hand, he heard the fat man Li Min point his finger and say in surprise, Senior Yuan, look, the spirit-devouring insects are starting to eat the earth again. No, they are starting to eat the earth that was hit by the cultivator's yellow talismans. Ah? Yuan Qing was overjoyed and looked over. Sure enough, the earth-devouring worms that were hit by the earth's sturdy talismans started to move again. They were devouring the yellow soil that was as hard as crystals. Rustle, rustle. The sound was extremely crisp. It seemed that the spirit-swallowing bugs liked it very much. The hard soil was no match for the spirit-swallowing bug's teeth. When the battle sword saw this, even he didn't know why such a mutation occurred. He could only secretly rejoice in his heart. The heavens have blessed my sword domain. Ing Chao laughed loudly. That's right, the heavens are really protecting our sword region. The swordsmen all laughed. Meanwhile, Tu Hong's expression had turned extremely ugly. How is that possible? The earth beneath the earth-firm talisman is even harder than a top-grade crystal stone. Lan Exen whispered, her face ashen. Everything has its vanquisher. Tu Hong sighed dejectedly. Of course, everything had to be subdued. What Xiaohua wanted to subdue was naturally the jade marrow. In order to not leave behind any jade marrow for the sword cultivators, Xiaohua had worked very hard and diligently for nearly 2 days. His heart began to whisper to himself. Damn it, I feel like something is wrong. If Cui Hongshan is Tu Hong's illegitimate son, then I can understand this arrangement. Otherwise, there would never be a meat pie that would fall from the sky. This young master will go and take a look. Xiaohua put away the wishful staff and used a concealment technique to return to where Cui Hongshan and the others were meditating. The 6 idiots were still sitting there obediently. Cui Hongshan didn't dare to put away his captain's token into his storage bag. Instead, he held it in his hands, looking at it from time to time for fear that he would delay the attack. Following the rules, Xiaohua sneered disdainfully. The disciples of the cultivation families are all so inflexible. It's no wonder that it's not easy for them to become characters that can stand proudly on the Dawn Rain continent. Cui Hongshan, if you are like this, then your bullshit dream. I'm afraid it will really be a dream. Then, without a word, Xiaohua fled towards the direction he had come from. Although Xiaohua's memory wasn't very good, after searching for half an hour, he still found the tunnel he had come from. However, at this time, the tunnel had been sealed, and a layer of solid restriction had firmly sealed the entrance of the cave. Ha! Xiaohua's divine sense swept through the restriction, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. This restriction was very strange. Not only was it thick, but it also absorbed divine sense. Even the spiritual power fluctuations of the restriction were extremely unstable. Which cultivator laid this down? It's really rough. Xiaohua was somewhat disdainful. With a wave of his hand, he took out the rabbit talisman and was about to insert it into the array. However, when his first talisman touched the array, an earthy yellow brilliance immediately flashed, and an extremely slight explosion burst out from the array, like a fried soybean. Looking at the spiritual power fluctuations, it was like pouring water on oil, making a sizzling sound. Ouch! Xiaohua was shocked. He didn't dare to try again and immediately took back the talisman. It wasn't until the time it took to eat a meal that the spiritual power fluctuations gradually calmed down. Good boy, is the level of the cultivator who laid this array higher than this master or lower than this master? Xiaohua pinched his chin and was somewhat pensive. This array was the defensive array of Jin Quan Mountain, and at this time, The cultivators of Jinquan Mountain were fighting with the swordsmen of Huan country. Perhaps it was a cruel battle above. How could Xiao Hua dare to carelessly destroy it? If he wasn't careful, he would become the eternal sinner of the Dao sect, right? This is difficult. Xiao Hua shook his head and turned around to look at the surface of the earth. Sure enough, it was as he had expected. The area around him was filled with this kind of extremely unstable formation. Xiao Hua frowned and no longer flew upwards. He also didn't check other places and returned to the place where Cui Hongshan and the others were resting. Seeing Xiao Hua return, Cui Hongshan's heart inexplicably calmed down, but his face was still indifferent. He looked up and down at Xiao Hua, not even greeting him. "Get up!" Xiao Hua flew in front of everyone and shouted, "This Xiao found some problems." Everyone was surprised and hurriedly got up. Zhen Minghui glanced at Cui Hongshan and turned to ask Xiao Hua, "Junior brother Xiao, what did you find?" "We are trapped in an array." Xiao Hua glanced at everyone and said, "This array seems to be very big." This Xiao didn't have the time to examine it carefully, but it seems that there is only one team of Imperial Thunder Sect disciples here. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. "Fellow Cui, what is your relationship with Tu Hong?" Xiao Hua looked up and down at Cui Hongshan and asked with bad intentions. "What relationship?" Cui Hongshan frowned and said curiously, "You have already asked this question before, and this Cui has also answered it." "Strange." Xiao Hua scratched his head and pointed at Zhen Minghui, "Senior brother Minghui, go to the east side and see if there are any other teams of disciples. And this Zhen will go over now." Zhen Minghui saw Xiao Hua's serious expression and didn't dare to be negligent. This time, he didn't even look at Cui Hongshan and cupped his hands and said. When Zhen Minghui turned around, Xiao Hua ordered again, "Senior brother Su, senior brother Qiu, don't be idle. Take Zhenhua and Baisu Gu to the west side and other places." Su Qing and Qiu Su didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly waved their hands to take the two Qi refinement disciples. Unexpectedly, Cui Hongshan anxiously said, "Wait a moment." Su Qing and the others' eyes quickly turned, their gazes frequently moving between Xiao Hua and Cui Hongshan. "Why don't you go?" Cui Hongshan asked Xiao Hua. "AI, this Xiao was born with a bad sense of direction." Xiao Hua sighed and shrugged. "Moreover, this Xiao has an important matter to do." "What matter?" Cui Hongshan asked. "Naturally, it is a mission to minimize the losses of my Dao sect." "Hee, you won't understand even if I tell you." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said. "Yes." Cui Hongshan nodded and turned his head. "This Cui will go to the north. You all follow Xiao Hua's instructions and go to the west and south." Then, he threw the captain's token to Xiao Hua and said, "You stay here and guard the left side. If there are any abnormalities on the token, quickly send a communication talisman, or act according to the previous arrangements." Xiao Hua thought for a moment and took the token. He was also afraid that something would really happen. If he was here, he would be far more important than these 6 idiots. However, after watching the 6 people leave, Xiao Hua only sat quietly for a moment. It was as if there were sores growing under his butt. The temptation of the jade essence was really too great. "Forget it. Let's go and mine the jade essence." Xiao Hua got up and fled again. "As long as I am within the formation, the token will react. When the time comes, this young master will come back again." Not to mention the discovery of the Imperial Thunder Sect's first team, the earth-devouring worms that were hit by the earth-hard talisman on the Quanjin Mountain stratum became even more ferocious. Not only did they easily devour the soil that was as hard as crystals, even the speed at which they devoured ordinary soil was more than twice as fast. In just half a day's time, 100 zhang deep hole had already appeared in the soil stratum. Cultivators really go for wool and come home shorn. Yuan Qing laughed loudly. Not only did they not use the talisman to kill our spiritual worms, they even helped our spiritual worms mutate. What made this old man the happiest was that their Quanjin Mountains disciples lost quite a few again. That's exactly the case. Battle Sword also laughed loudly at the side. Even this old man did not expect that this cultivator's talisman would actually have an effect on the earth-devouring worms. In the future, this old man still has to try more. Who knows, maybe I can cultivate the spirit-devouring worms. Battle sword friend, can your earth-devouring worms rest for a while? Ing Chao reminded, if you want to pull the cultivator out from the ground, these earth-devouring worms are a strong aid. You can't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Yes, this junior understands. Battle sword nodded. In another hour, we will let the earth-devouring worms rest. Ing Chao nodded slightly and said to Yuan Qing, if the earth-devouring worms rest, we sword cultivators should not be idle. Let's all exercise our hands and feet. Consecutive sword formation. Alright. Yuan Qing clapped his hands and said, this old man has been feeling a little lonely for the past half a day, let's use the flying sword too. Chapter 23:45. Sure enough, an hour later, after the disciples of the wild beast villa had collected the earth-devouring insects, the sword cultivators once again split into two groups. One group still stood on their swords and guarded in midair, while the other group formed into a formation and attacked the 300-meter-wide black hole. Several hundred sword cultivators with similar sword equipment each took out their flying swords. As the flying swords flew through the air, the similar sword intents on the flying swords resonated with each other, and the several hundred flying swords gradually condensed into a single massive flying sword. Weng weng, the humming of swords emitted from the massive flying sword. It was actually a cultivator's magic weapon. All sorts of heaven and earth spiritual energy began to rapidly surge forth, filling up the gaps between the small flying swords. Go! Several hundred sword cultivators moved their minds, all of them simultaneously chanting the same sword chant. The massive flying sword slowly began to move, and a multicolored sword light condensed into a massive sword light that pierced straight into the black hole. Whoa! The flying sword seemed to tear the air apart. When it entered the black hole, it gave rise to a strange sound of wind whistling. Its power was extremely great. Bang! With a loud explosion, countless clouds of dust burst out from the black hole, shooting straight up into the sky. However, as the winter wind blew, all of this dust was blown away, turning into dust that drifted between the heavens and earth. Oh my God! Seeing the several hundred sword cultivators on the light screen, Lon Exen couldn't help but cry out, This is simply the cultivation of swords. At most, it's just a little bit closer to the realm of swords. Tu Hong sneered. If their array formation really had the strength to transform into swords, then who would want to fight them? Yes, this old man understands. Lon Exen smiled. It's just that seeing such a fierce sword array for the first time makes me a bit nervous. Tu Hong did not express his opinion. He only squinted his eyes as he watched the swordsmen keep their flying swords and slowly form their formation again. He said faintly, these flying swords look very powerful, but they are useless. Which cultivator would directly face these several hundred swordsmen as an enemy? Even a cultivator whose strength is comparable to a third-grade illusory sword cultivator wouldn't allow them to easily form their sword array. If it were the many cultivators of my Dao sect, would they have the time to form a sword array? It's only because my Jingquan Mountains array is underground that they are wasting their sword origin for no reason. On top of that, you are strutting around in front of my Golden Spring Mountain. They're just a fox using a tiger's might to intimidate others. Tu Hong sneered. If old brother Lon goes out, they'll definitely be scared witless. I dare not. There must be an illusory swordsman beside the sword cultivator. This old man is no match for him. Lon Exen was very humble. She asked, should we take advantage of this time and give them a head-on blow? Wait a little longer. Tu Hong only said 2 words before falling silent. As Lon Exen saw this, she could only stand there in silence, quietly watching the sword cultivator show off his might. He knew in his heart that his cultivation couldn't compare with Tu Hong's, and he was even more inferior to Tu Hong's when it came to commanding troops. In a battle where hundreds of people would die, he really couldn't deal with it. Seeing the numerous swordsmen fly out one after another and the black hole being struck down several hundred feet, Yuan Qing also laughed out loud. He flew up and loudly shouted, "All of you retreat, let this old man move his hands and feet." The swordsmen who had just put away their flying swords and were about to use them again hurriedly agreed and scattered to the side. Yuan Qing flew up into the air. He pointed a finger and the flying sword beneath his feet shot up into the air. Yuan Qing opened his mouth and a sword origin shot out, quickly catching up with the flying sword. With a "so" sound, the flying sword suddenly accelerated, and a small spark flashed from the flying sword. The spark became increasingly hot, gradually expanding. In an instant, the flying sword flew up several dozen feet, and the spark had already turned into a fireball. However, this wasn't the end. The flying sword continued to fly up into the air. The bird cultivators in the air scattered, creating a large gap. Then, the flying sword suddenly burst apart, turning into a giant fireball. Speed, Yuan Qing's hands formed a sword seal, and he casually pointed his finger. His expression seemed relaxed, but there was a dignified look in his eyes. Twing, the sound of a sword humming came from the flying sword of a nearby swordsman. Looking at the fireball in the air, it was like a meteor, but also like a blazing sun falling from the heavens. It cut across the horizon, emitting a loud rumbling sound as it smashed into the black hole. Now's the time. Tu Hong and Lan Xen were also watching Yuan Qing show off. Just as Lan Xen was dumbfounded by the might of this flying sword, Tu Hong suddenly shouted out. Oh, Lan Xen was stunned, as if she hadn't reacted yet. Tu Hong's lips curved up in a smile. He pointed his finger at the triangular magic tool, and at the same time, his figure also flew out. On the ground a little further away from the black hole, there was a faint flash of light. At this time, many sword cultivators were scattered in the air, smiles hanging on their faces as they watched Yuan Qing display his skills. No one thought that Tu Hong would suddenly attack the illusory swordsman while he was displaying his power. And Yuan Qing's attention was also on the flying sword. When the meteor-like flying sword smashed into the black hole, a burst of battle cries resounded through Gold Spring Mountain. Boom! There was an earth-shattering tremor. The entire ground was shaking. This boom was not only from Yuan Qing's flying sword, but also the sound of thousands of ambushing cultivators' artifacts and treasures hitting the sword cultivator's body. The sword cultivators were obviously caught off guard. As soon as they came into contact with the flying sword, over a dozen sword cultivators were struck by their magic tools, and their bodies fell from the sky. Damn it, Yuan Qing had already noticed the commotion when the flying sword fell. But his sword seal had already been formed, and he couldn't stop the flying sword, so he had no choice but to drive the flying sword into the black hole. Seeing the sword cultivators fall, he flew into a rage out of humiliation. He pointed his finger, and the blazing sun once again flew out from the black hole, piercing straight towards the many Foundation establishment cultivators. The intense sword light was like a glaring sun as it struck the cultivators. Not to mention the cultivators fighting back, they couldn't even open their eyes. Yuan Qing, your opponent is this general. A roar sounded from the ground. A yellow light flashed, and Tu Hong's figure appeared in the air. Yuan Qing heard a cultivator call out his name. He was surprised, but he didn't withdraw the sword seal in his hand. Go! Tu Hong waved his hand, and the serpent spear he was holding in his hand flew into the air. The serpent spear whistled through the air, and it actually transformed into a yellow serpent that charged towards the scorching sun. The bloody snake opened its mouth wide, as if it wanted to swallow the blazing sun in one gulp. Chapter 2346. So you are the Golden Core Cultivator from Golden Spring Mountain. Yuan Qing laughed as he activated his sword art and said, You actually managed to find out my name. Seems like you want to have a taste of my power. Woo, the huge python circled in the air and a large amount of earth attribute spiritual energy quickly condensed, blocking many cultivators under its body. The huge mouth swallowed the sun into its stomach. Instantly, the entire battlefield dimmed and the screams of the sword cultivators seemed to have weakened. However, Tu Hong's face was still grim while Yuan Qing's face was calm, which was thought-provoking. Tu Hong activated his magic power, and while controlling his magic treasure, he quickly released his spiritual sense to scan Ning Chao and the rest. However, when his spiritual sense scanned Ling Yunwu and the other illusory swordsman, his face changed. Maybe it was because of his shock that his state of mind was disturbed, or maybe it was because his magic power was not enough to suppress Yuan Qing's flying sword. Yuan Qing slightly raised his sword art and shouted, "Break!" Numerous light rays faintly penetrated the body of the huge yellow python. Following which, the number of light rays increased rapidly and the huge python's abdomen expanded rapidly. With a loud purring, a scorching aura was emitted from the huge python. The flying sword actually broke through the huge python's encirclement and rushed out. Furthermore, the flying sword did not seem to stop. It rapidly expanded and contracted a few times and immediately turned into a fiery red stream of light and pierced towards Tu Hong. This time, the flying sword was different from the previous one. It did not have much power and only countless sparks could be seen from the stream of light. However, Tu Hong, who was in the middle of the battle, did not have a relaxed expression on his face. A huge pressure appeared in the air, and when Tu Hong scanned the flying sword with his divine sense, he could feel the powerful force contained within the flying sword. He did not dare to slack off. The attack power of a sword cultivator was not a joke, not to mention the flying sword of an illusory sword cultivator. Go! Tu Hong waved his hand and the magic treasure which had already reverted back to its spear form drew an arc in the air and stabbed towards the flying sword. With a loud keng, the spear and the flying sword collided and countless sparks splashed out. An unpleasant screeching sound came from the point of collision between the spear and the flying sword, rapidly spreading to the entire battlefield. Nearly a dozen cultivators and swordsmen couldn't bear the ear-piercing sound and fell from the sky one after another. The flying sword looked like a fireball that had been doused with water, floating in the air dimly. Tu Hong's spear also flipped a few times in the air, floating at a slanted angle to the side. You also know sword cultivation? A trace of surprise flashed across Yuan Qing's eyes as he asked. Then he looked at Tu Hong's martial attire and said thoughtfully, "Even if you have never practiced flying swords, you are still somewhat related to my sword domain." Sword cultivators are indeed arrogant. You guys are too conceited. Could it be that the flying swords of my Dao sect are inferior to the flying swords of your swordsmen? Can I, too, know a little bit about flying sword techniques? Tu Hong laughed coldly. If a cultivator from my Dao sect used a flying sword to kill a swordsman from sword cultivator, would you say that he was definitely a swordsman from sword cultivator? All flows return to origin. It is said that no matter if it is a cultivator or a swordsman, they are all the same in the immortal realm. Your knowledge is not bad. Yuan Qing still had a strong attitude and asked again, "Since you know that I am Yuan Qing, why don't you report your name?" When two armies are facing each other, knowing the enemy and knowing yourself will ensure victory. Tu Hong laughed coldly. You sword cultivators have besieged my Golden Spring Mountain for many days and have already investigated the situation of my Golden Spring Mountain. How is it possible that you don't even know my name? When Yuan Qing heard this, his face turned red. He really didn't think so much. Your father will kill you. Why would I care who you are? Yuan Qing waved his hand and the flying sword landed in his hand. An illusory swordsman is only a. Tu Hong naturally wouldn't back down. Then this old man will let you see what a real illusory sword is. Yuan Qing laughed loudly and his body slowly flew up. He activated the true Yuan in his body and a brilliant sword light shot out from Yuan Qing's body. An unusually hot sword essence rushed out uncontrollably. At this moment, Li Min and Ying Chao, who were the closest to Yuan Qing, couldn't bear it and hurriedly flew back. They only stopped after flying back a few hundred feet. Yuan Qing's body emitted flames which heated up the surrounding air. The sword light followed the flames and rushed into the long sword in his hand. Hence, the flying sword became even brighter and gradually elongated. At the same time, as the flying sword elongated, Yuan Qing's body started to turn illusory and elongated. He seemed to be fusing with the flying sword. Seeing such a situation, how could Tu Hong wait any longer? He waved his hand and activated his true Yuan. The long spear once again turned into a giant python and rushed towards Yuan Qing. At the same time, Tu Hong's hands formed seals again and the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth condensed around him. It was another familiar sword hum. However, this sword hum was getting louder and louder. When it reached its peak, Yuan Qing's flying sword fused with his arms, and his figure was faintly switching between a sword and a human form. At this moment, Tu Hong's long spear was already in front of him. There was a faint stench coming from the bloody snake's mouth. Yuan Qing raised his arm slightly and the long sword drew a line in the air. It seemed slow, but in reality, it was very fast. In an instant, it reached the mouth of the long spear first. Clang! Once again, there was a collision sound. However, unlike before, when the long spear collided with the long sword, it immediately split into three. The three shadows bypassed the flying sword and rushed towards Yuan Qing. Your Taoist sect likes to play with such superficial things. Yuan Qing's voice was as sonorous as gold and stone. Then, the long sword split into 3 rays of sword light that were even faster than the long spear. In an instant, they hit the giant python's shadow. However, at this moment, something strange happened again. Hundreds of earth spikes suddenly shot out from the mountain where Yuan Qing was. These earth spikes rushed into the air and the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth also condensed into a part of the earth spikes. They were all aimed at Yuan Qing's legs at an extremely fast speed. You do have some tricks up your sleeve? Yuan Qing was slightly stunned. He hurriedly waved his hand and a few more rays of sword light flew over. Swoosh, 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 they cut off the earth spikes. They were extremely sharp. However, as soon as the sword light flashed, countless spikes suddenly appeared in the space several feet around Yuan Qing like branches and vines, closing in on Yuan Qing's body. Yuan Qing was a little surprised. It was easy to cut off the earth spikes horizontally. However, the sharp spikes were shining with a dark light. They were not easy to deal with. Yuan Qing did not dare to be careless. Sword light flowed around his body and his figure gradually disappeared. He turned into a long sword that pointed to the sky. Crack! The earth spikes quickly spread out and quickly covered Yuan Qing. Then, they suddenly closed up and tightly wrapped around Yuan Qing. However, Ying Chao and the others watched from afar and had no intention of helping. Spike! Tu Hong's face flashed with a hint of savagery. He grabbed at the compressed earth spikes and was about to activate his Dharma power again. At this moment, a sharp ray of sword light suddenly shot out from the yellow earth spikes. It slashed through the earth spikes and a flying sword flew out from the earth spikes. Yuan Qing's maniacal laughter came from the flying sword. Then, his body could no longer maintain the sword form. A few rays of sword light flashed and appeared. How can the Taoist sect know about my sword cultivator's Dharma power? Yuan Qing raised his eyebrows and said, Your Dharma power is indeed powerful. However, against a sword cultivator like me, it's just a small trick. Is that so? Tu Hong sneered. He suddenly waved his other hand that had been hidden in his Taoist robe. A wave of spiritual power suddenly trembled around Tu Hong. This is? Yuan Qing was stunned. His eyes flashed as he saw the remains of the 6 long spears that he had cut in half earlier surrounding him. Rumble! As soon as Yuan Qing saw the remains of the spear, the 6 spear remains began to shine with a bright yellow light and exploded like fireworks. An extremely strong tearing force rushed toward Yuan Qing's body. This is bad. Seeing Tu Hong explode his Dharma treasure, Yuan Qing was shocked. He quickly flew up and tried to escape. However, he was still too slow. The 6 forces tore at his body like 6 large hands and threw him high into the sky. What scared Yuan Qing the most was that he had barely dodged the 6 forces. The spikes that he had broken free from earlier were also ignited by the Dharma treasure. An even stronger explosive force rushed toward him. Pooh, Yuan Qing was shocked. He could no longer hold back. He opened his mouth and a blood-red ray of sword light flew out. It was like a shooting star that pierced toward the exploding spikes. It was extremely strange. When the ray of sword light pierced through, it was as if it had pierced through a pocket. The exploding spikes suddenly deflated and shrank toward the spot where the ray of sword light had pierced through. Then they disappeared. The small sword that had pierced through the exploding spikes had also become much dimmer. Haha, Yuan Qing, you old thief, how's my technique? Tu Hong laughed loudly. Then, his body flashed with earth-yellow light again. His body landed on the ground and disappeared. At the same time, many other Dao sect cultivators also left the battlefield and landed on the ground. They also disappeared like Tu Hong. Wang Wang. A loud sword hum sounded and a fiery red ray of sword light flashed. Yuan Qing transformed into a long sword and slashed at the spot where Tu Hong had disappeared. Boom boom boom. A huge crack that was dozens of feet deep appeared on the ground. When the long sword transformed back into Yuan Qing's human form, his face turned pale. Despicable brat. Yuan Qing's eyes were wide open as he stood in midair. The long sword in his hand was like a rainbow as he shouted loudly. Yes, Yuan Qing was a third-grade illusory swordsman. His strength was comparable to a late-stage Golden Core Realm cultivator. In terms of attack power, he was even stronger than a late-stage Golden Core Realm cultivator. Previously, when he used the flying sword, his strength was definitely not something that Tu Hong could compare to. However, Tu Hong made use of the flying sword divine ability that he had just used to attack him. Then he used the exploding spikes and the explosion of his magic treasure to trap Yuan Qing. Although Yuan Qing did not suffer any serious injuries and only suffered some minor injuries due to the depletion of his sword origin, but, when he thought about it, Tu Hong was only at the peak of the early-stage Golden Core Realm. He had not even reached the mid-stage Golden Core Realm. Yuan Qing's face was really a big loss. Chapter 2347. Ha, a sword friend Yuan Qing. Ying Chao flew over and said with a smile, "This cultivator named Tu from Jinquan Mountain is really sinister. He actually took advantage of the fact that you just used up your sword origin to launch a sneak attack. It's normal that you couldn't kill him." Hearing Ying Chao mention Tu Hong's death, Yuan Qing's face turned red. To be honest, he really did look down on Tu Hong and wanted to play with him. He wanted to show off the power of the skyscraping sword sect in front of so many sword cultivators and bird cultivators, and vent the anger of the sword cultivators who lost their lives over the past few days. But everything seemed to be out of his expectations. Sigh, I have still underestimated this Dao sect cultivator. Yuan Qing was helpless and could only sigh and admit, they definitely can't beat us sword cultivators in terms of fighting, but their mysterious secret techniques and spells are really troublesome. That's right. Ling Yunwu also flew over and said with a smile, if not, how could a thunder-controlling sect disciple pretend to be a foundation establishment cultivator? How could a group of sword cultivators be intimidated? If not, how could I invite more than 10 illusory swordsmen to deal with this thunder-controlling sect disciple? Yuan Qing seemed to empathize with him and immediately sympathized with Ling Yunwu. He asked again, that golden core cultivator wasn't the one you were looking for, right? Ling Yunwu shook his head. This person was dressed in martial attire and called himself a cultivator from Jinquan Mountain. He's not a thunder-controlling sect disciple. Also, I've observed for a long time. None of the Dao sect disciples that appeared were wearing the thunder-controlling sect uniform. How's the damage just now? Yuan Qing glanced at Ying Chao and asked in a low voice. I've asked the disciples in the sky to do some calculations. The Dao sect cultivator's sneak attack just now killed about 230 warriors of the sword domain. Ying Chao also replied in a low voice. Also, the Dao sect cultivator was prepared. This time, only 70 cultivator corpses were left. Yuan Qing let out a long sigh. He looked at the deep pit and said coldly, Valley Master Li, how's your earth-devouring bug? Okay, Senior Yuan, We still have to wait for another 2 hours. Li Min hurriedly replied. All right, brave warriors of Sword Region. Continue to vent your anger on the cultivators underground. Yuan Qing waved his hand and said, this time, the Dao sect cultivators will definitely not dare to launch a sneak attack. Yes. The sword cultivators were already burning with rage after being ambushed by the cultivators. When they heard Yuan Qing's command, they cheered loudly and rearranged their formation to attack the black hole. Inside the Golden Spring Mountain, Tu Hong's face was covered in a layer of faint golden color. He was sitting on a chair and adjusting his breath. A layer of yellow brilliance was flowing around his body, emitting a faint glow. Lan Exen looked at him for a moment and then quietly walked out. After an hour, Lan Exen quietly returned once more. Tu Hong had already returned to his original appearance. General, Lan Exen glanced at the light screen above the magic tool and whispered, those strange spirit insects have been released again. Let's hold on for now. Tu Hong sighed and waved his hand. The cultivators of my Golden Spring Mountain are far too weak compared to the swordsmen. Let's gather our strength first and wait for the final battle. General, for you to injure that illusory sword cultivator is already commendable. There is no need to blame yourself. Lan Exen misunderstood and quickly comforted him. Ha, old brother Lan. Tu Hong waved his hand and smiled. Although that Yuan Qing's cultivation is at the late golden core stage, I really made him eat a loss just now. Although I had to abandon my magic tool and was only slightly injured, Yuan Qing's injuries are definitely worse than mine. To be able to make a late golden core swordsman fall under my hands, even if I die I will still be happy. This old man was also frightened just now. Lan Exen didn't hide her feelings and smiled apologetically. Tu Hong pointed at the light screen and said, not only are the disciples of my Golden Spring Mountain inferior to the sword cultivators outside, but the high-level disciples are also inferior. Look here, where the light screen cannot see, there are dozens of illusory swordsmen standing there. None of them are inferior to Yuan Qing. Ah? Dozens of illusory swordsmen? Lan Exen was dumbfounded. How could a sword cultivator invest so many illusory swords in my Golden Spring Mountain? This doesn't make sense. Who knows? Tu Hong didn't lose his composure like Lan Exen. He coldly said, the more they come, the happier I will be. General? Lan Exen hesitated for a moment, hesitating. What's wrong? Tu Hong curiously asked, does old brother Lan have something to say? The cultivators of the Dao sect, they have something to say. Lan Exen whispered, if General hadn't decisively killed a Golden Spring Mountain disciple last time, I'm afraid they would have come knocking on our door. These damned cultivators. Tu Hong gnashed his teeth. They claim to be the orthodox disciples of the Dao sect. They don't even place my Sky Patrol City in their eyes. What do they know about deploying troops? What do they know about the Dao of illusions? That's right. Lan Exen bitterly smiled. They say that my Golden Spring Mountain has too few disciples and that they are all hiding somewhere, so they have to go out and risk their lives. Hearing this, Tu Hong wasn't angry. Instead, he smiled and said, these disciples of the Dao sect are quite smart. That's enough. Tell them to cultivate in seclusion. In a few days, that sword cultivator's spirit insects will swallow up the earth layer into the defensive array formation. At that time, we will have our final battle. If we are not their match, then we will abandon this Golden Spring Mountain Spirit Stone Mine. That's not good. Lan Exen whispered, weakening our morale without fighting is not the way to win. Moreover, if those Dao sect cultivators hear this, won't they all run away? This old man wants them to run away, but do you think those sword cultivators will agree? Tu Hong sneered, if they want to live, then their only choice is to desperately kill the enemy. Yes, this old man understands. Lan Exen nodded and turned to leave. Looking at Lan Exen's back, Tu Hong's eyes fell on the light screen. He frowned, thinking to himself, how come there are suddenly over a dozen illusory swordsmen? These illusory swordsmen don't seem to be from the sword faction that is responsible for this area. What are they doing here? That's right, even if Tu Hong cracked his head, he still wouldn't know that these illusory swordsmen had come for Xiao Hua, who was still at the bottom of the spirit stone mine. How is it? Several days passed. Seeing that there was no movement from the captain's token, Xiao Hua had no choice but to come out and take a look. At this time, Cui Hongshan and the others had already returned. Xiao Hua looked at their grim expressions and asked in a low voice. Good, junior apprentice brother Xiao knows. Zhen Minghui said, we've looked all around, and it really is the same as junior apprentice brother said. There isn't a single cultivator here. There isn't any movement at all. Chapter 2348. I also tried to send a transmission talisman to Fang Yuan and the others, but there was no response. Cui Hongshan's expression was somewhat abnormal, but it wasn't as ugly as Zhen Minghui and the others. He said, it seems we are trapped in a formation. It's good that you know. Do you have any ideas? Xiao Hua returned the captain's token to Cui Hongshan and asked. Actually, there is no need for any good ideas. Cui Hongshan squeezed out a smile and said, maybe Senior Tu Hong has other arrangements. We have other important matters to attend to here. Are you sure you can send your magic power into the formation? Xiao Hua couldn't help but mock. In any case, I am confident I don't have this ability. How could Cui Hongshan not hear Xiao Hua's mockery? He said angrily, I know your cultivation is deeper than mine, but you don't need to remind me all the time, right? Senior Tu Hong is a senior expert, the commander of the army. He definitely has his reasons for arranging us here. Even if there are some mistakes, I'm afraid it is unintentional. As for the intention to harm others that you are projecting, he definitely won't have it. How do you know? Is Tu Hong Cui Hong? Xiao Hua asked. Some people don't need to be understood. Cui Hongshan sneered. You only need to look at these people and you will admire them from the bottom of your heart and obey them from the bottom of your heart. This is where the charm of a person lies. Although this Cui has only met Senior Tu Hong a few times, from the first time this Cui saw him, I knew that this was the kind of person he was. He is someone I can entrust my life to. Good boy. You are really amazing. Xiao Hua smacked his lips and sneered. You don't even recognize this Xiao as your senior brother from the same sect, and you don't even care about this Xiao saving your life. You dare to entrust your life to someone you've never met before? My life was saved by you. You can take it away at any time if you want. Cui Hongshan didn't show any weakness, but you can't control my thoughts. Could it be that you've never met such a person? You only met once and you can treat each other with sincerity? Xiao Hua was at a loss. There was Fairy Hong Xia. He only met her once and their hearts were connected. The second time they met, the third time, damn it, it was even more excessive. Where's the guy? Naturally, it was Ziyi. It was a very strange feeling. Although Xiao Hua might not dare to entrust his life to Ziyi, the power of his trust was undeniable. All right, your eloquence can't be said. It's much stronger than your cultivation. This Xiao won't compete with you in this. Xiao Hua didn't admit it. He pointed his hand and said, Zhenhua, come here. Oh yes, martial Uncle Xiao. Zhenhua said respectfully. At this moment, he held this martial Uncle Xiao in high esteem. Not to mention that Xiao Hua's cultivation was so profound that it made him dizzy. Just the fact that Xiao Hua didn't put in much effort and there were already a lot of good things in his storage bag was enough to make him obediently listen to Xiao Hua. Come with me. Xiao Hua turned around and left. Zhenhua didn't dare to delay and hurriedly followed. After more than half a day, Xiao Hua brought Zhenhua back again. Looking at Zhenhua's baffled appearance, Cui Hongshan was also baffled. He raised his eyes and asked, Xiao Hua, in this gourd of yours, what kind of medicine did you buy? If you want to live, then listen to this Xiao. Xiao Hua was too lazy to explain to him. If you have anything you're curious about, just ask him. After saying that, he flew away again without stopping. Zhenhua, what did he do to you? Cui Hongshan asked curiously. This disciple also doesn't know. Zhenhua was extremely bewildered. Martial Uncle Xiao only called this disciple out. Then, This disciple's vision turned black and I didn't know anything. After waking up, Martial Uncle Xiao kept asking this disciple, "How do you feel? How's the true qi in your body? Your cultivation hasn't changed, right?" And others such extremely strange questions. And then, Cui Hongshan asked. And then? Then Martial Uncle Xiao brought this disciple back. Zhenhua was also puzzled. How long has it been? You don't know what happened? Bai Sugu asked in surprise. Half a day? Zhenhua scratched his head and smiled apologetically. This disciple's vision indeed turned black and I don't know anything. Then, did your cultivation change? Zhenming Hui came to his senses and hurriedly asked. No, this disciple exercised his mental cultivation method. After checking for a long time, I didn't find any abnormalities. Zhenhua said very decisively. Zhenming Hui looked at Cui Hongshan. The two of them were a little dumbfounded. They really couldn't think of what Xiao Hua did to Zhenhua. Forget it. Su Qing waved her hand and said, Anyway, junior brother Xiao won't harm us. Let's just listen to his arrangements. What else could they do? Cui Hongshan was dejected and sat on the ground. Looking at the unresponsive captain's token in his hand, his eyes were dull. He really didn't know what to do. But at this moment, the captain's token emitted a faint spiritual energy fluctuation. Cui Hongshan rubbed his eyes in disbelief and hurriedly shouted, Xiao Hua, quickly look, the captain's token has reacted. Senior Tu Hong ordered us to attack. Xiao Hua, quickly, send a message to Xiao Hua. Cui Hongshan hurriedly ordered Zhen Minghui, let him come and see. Senior Tu Hong definitely didn't lie to us. Cui Hongshan seemed to have grabbed onto a life-saving straw. Yes. Zhen Minghui hurriedly sent out the communication talisman. When Xiao Hua returned, Cui Hongshan handed the captain's token to him as if he was presenting a treasure and said, Take a look, Senior Tu Hong has issued an order for us to attack. Attack from here? Xiao Hua was obviously stunned and somewhat didn't dare to believe it. This seems a little inappropriate. Cui Hongshan released his divine sense and didn't see any formation, so he hesitated and said, Then, can we fly a little higher? Zhen Minghui's brain was active and he immediately asked. Then, let's go up and take a look. Cui Hongshan nodded. The closer we are to the formation, the more we can activate our magic power defense. Okay. Xiao Hua could only agree and nod. Seeing that Xiao Hua was the same, everyone flew out of the cave. Under Cui Hongshan's lead, they flew up the path that Cui Hongshan had previously explored. After flying for an hour, Cui Hongshan's captain's token suddenly emitted a strong spiritual energy fluctuation. Then, a fluctuation that was 100 times stronger swept across the captain's token and swept across everyone's body. Xiao Hua was stunned and hurriedly released his divine sense. Previously, his divine sense couldn't reach far because it was blocked by the special layer of soil of Mount Quanjin. But now, without any obstruction, it swept out in an instant. Xiao Hua's expression changed greatly and he shouted, Cui Hongshan. Forget it, do you still want to live? Why is that? Cui Hongshan was also flustered. Just as he was about to sweep his divine sense out, who knew that before his divine sense could leave his body, dozens of divine senses swept over like sharp swords and locked onto everyone in an instant. And after the dozens of divine senses, there were even hundreds of divine senses following behind. Everyone said without hesitation. Okay, Xiao Hua also nodded. He hurriedly stretched out his hand and untied a spirit storage pouch from his waist. He reached out and grabbed the back of Cui Hongshan's neck. His thumb pinched the back of Cui Hongshan's neck and Cui Hongshan fainted. Xiao Hua threw Cui Hongshan into the spirit storage pouch, no different from throwing a little duck. This. Zhen Minghui and the rest opened their eyes wide. They finally understood why Zhenhua had been unconscious for half a day and why Xiao Hua asked if Zhenhua was injured. Damn it, do you still want to live? Quickly come over. Xiao Hua shouted and waved his hand again. Zhenhua fell into his hand without any strength to fight back and was thrown into the spirit storage pouch again, I thought of this method with great difficulty. Don't worry, as long as I don't die, nothing will happen to you. Okay, although Zhen Minghui and the rest were extremely unhappy, who could say anything? Falling into the spirit storage pouch would be treated the same as a spirit beast. At least it was better than falling into the hands of a sword cultivator and dying. However, to put a cultivator into the spirit storage pouch, perhaps only a fierce person like Xiaohua could think of such a cunning idea. Xiaohua didn't care about what they thought. After putting the 6 dazed birds into the spirit storage pouch, he waved his hand and put them into the space. He raised his head and looked up, then turned around and flew down. Yuan Qing stood on the scorching sun sword with a trace of excitement on his face. He watched as the sword cultivators formed a group and struck the huge sword shadows into the ground. The dust that soared into the sky earlier could no longer fly high because the black hole that led to the Jinquan Mountain Spirit Stone Mine was already very deep. After waiting for the huge sword shadows to fiercely attack a few more times, Yuan Qing swept his divine sense and waved his hand. Disciples, take a rest. Conserve your energy. Disciples of the Mad Beast Manor, now that the Jinquan Mountain's defensive array is about to be exposed, release your earth-devouring bugs. Make the final attack. As long as we can take down this spirit stone mine, your Mad Beast Manor will have the greatest merit. At that time, there will be no shortage of spirit stones for you. Yes, this disciple understands. The many disciples of the Mad Beast Manor had excited expressions as they loudly responded. The battle sword flew to Yuan Qing's side and said with a smile, "Disciples, all of you have worked hard for the past few days. Not only have I seen it, the warriors of Sword Region have also remembered it in their hearts. All of your hard work will not be in vain. Just like what Villa Master said before coming here, all of you are the role models of my wild beast villa. Good, this old man won't say any unnecessary words. You all can command the earth-devouring bugs and finish the job in one fell swoop." The disciples responded, accompanied by the buzzing sounds of insects. In these past few days, the earth-devouring bugs seemed to have grown in size as they flew out from the hands of the disciples. They were like dark clouds that covered the sky as they flew into the black hole. General, Lan Xian's eyes were a bit tired. She looked at the light screen and whispered, "It's time for the disciples to go out. We've been avoiding battle for several days now. The momentum of these cultivators is very weak." Tu Hong had already returned to normal. His eyes shined as he glanced at Lan Xian and asked, "Are the cultivators of the Dao sect still complaining?" Chapter 2349. Yes, there are more and more complaints. Lan Xian replied without hesitation. Moreover, even my Golden Spring Mountain disciples have some doubts. After all, there are thousands of disciples that have gone missing. What did they say? What rumors are there? Our Golden Spring Mountain disciples are naturally incomparable to those Dao sect cultivators. General's military discipline is strict and strict. They only have some doubts, but they don't dare to talk too much. Tu Hong's eyes flashed with gratification. He nodded. Fortunately, these disciples have not disappointed this old man's many years of training. But he also had some regret. He whispered, "Unfortunately, in the face of such a great enemy, this old man cannot do anything alone. I fear that I will have to disappoint them. General can rest assured." Lan Xian cupped her hands across her chest. Not to mention the ordinary Golden Spring Mountain disciples, even this old man has long since decided to follow General. In my heart, I have already decided to live and die with Golden Spring Mountain and pursue General. Since we can die together, then we can live together. Tu Hong lifted his hand and smiled. In truth, the situation isn't that terrible. Dozens of illusory swordsmen. Lan Xian's eyes flashed with despair. Tu Hong had already seen this, but he didn't say anything. He only smiled and said, "Old brother Lan, you can rest assured. Since I dare to say this, then the disciples of Golden Spring Mountain will definitely have a chance to survive." But Lan Xian was still skeptical. She knew that those thousands of Golden Spring Mountain disciples had been hidden by Tu Hong, but No matter how many disciples there were, it was impossible for them to be a match for dozens of late golden core cultivators. Thinking of this, Lan Xian's eyes flashed with understanding. Good. At this time, Tu Hong's eyes shrank. He grit his teeth and slowly stood up. He ordered, "Old brother Lan, the sword cultivators have already approached my Golden Spring Mountain's defensive array formation. Life or death will be decided here. Inform the disciples to immediately meet the enemy. As long as we can drag them into the Spirit Stone mine, their mission will be complete. They get to escape." Lan Xian was stunned. But after a moment she hesitated. "Then, what about the Dao sect cultivators? Them?" Tu Hong smiled and waved his hand. "Life and death is up to fate, riches and honor is up to the heavens." "Yes, subordinate understands." Lan Xian cupped her hands together. Her eyes swept over the curtain of light, and then she hurried away. On the light screen, a deep black line had already touched the blood-red line. On the ground, Yuan Qing stared coldly at the black hole. The spiritual energy fluctuation in the black hole was getting stronger. Suddenly, Yuan Qing raised his eyebrows and a hint of a smile flashed through his eyes as he shouted, "Disciples, prepare to attack. The cowardly cultivators finally can't take it anymore." Ha! Upon hearing Yuan Qing's voice transmission, all the sword cultivator disciples perked up. Each of them activated the flying swords beneath their feet and waited for the battle to begin. The bird cultivators in the sky also flew down, covering the sky above Golden Fountain Mountain. They seemed to be preparing to attack the cultivators of Golden Fountain Mountain, and also seemed to be preventing the disciples of Golden Fountain Mountain from escaping. Indeed, the moment Yuan Qing's voice landed, the entire area started to flicker. The cultivators of Jinquan Mountain all rushed out from the light like a swarm of bees. The magic tools and treasures in their hands were the same as before, attacking towards the sword cultivator. However, the cultivators this time were clearly different from before. Not only were there several times more people, but the cultivators' ranks were also much higher. The cultivators are still struggling on the verge of death. Yuan Qing laughed heartily, but he did not go up. His target was Tu Hong. Moreover, the swordsman had indeed made great progress in the past few days of fighting. Regardless of whether it was their teamwork or killing, Yuan Qing and the other swordsmen were extremely satisfied. Feng Yuan was feeling a little tired. He only had 3 Tai Ching sect disciples left. When his Tai Ching sect disciples left Patrol Heaven City, there were 11 of them. When they were attacked by the beast cultivators, 4 of them died, leaving only 7. When they encountered the bird cultivators, another disciple escaped and was killed by the bird cultivators. Thus, only 6 disciples came to Golden Fountain Mountain. In the previous few days of fighting, although he was extremely careful, 2 Foundation Establishment initial stage disciples were still killed by the sword cultivators. Where did Xiaohua go? At this moment, Feng Yuan could not help but think of Xiaohua, who forced the bird cultivators to retreat. If this fierce person was here, I would not have died. However, Feng Yuan had already released his divine sense. Like the previous few times, there was not a single Imperial Thunder sect disciple on the battlefield. Maybe they have already escaped from the battlefield? Or there are other arrangements. Feng Yuan only had this trace of doubt, but he did not think about anything else. The green ring in his hand flew out and blocked a dust-like flying sword that was flying towards him. However, it was only able to block it for a brief moment. The flying sword that was like smoke and dust wrapped around the ring in an instant. Then, it split into several more flying swords that pierced diagonally and rushed out again. Quick! Feng Yuan did not seem to panic. He made a hand seal and the green ring produced a strong suction force. The dust-like flying sword was immediately sucked into the ring and turned into a 1-foot-long flying sword. The other flying swords were also sucked back. However, the flying sword had just returned to its original form when a layer of dark blue sword light flashed on it. A tearing force that was comparable to the suction force of the ring was produced. With a buzzing sound, the flying sword spun and flew out like a sharp awl. It was like an arrow that had been pulled taut from a bow, pulling the ring down several feet. Hiss! Fang Yuan sucked in a breath of cold air. The magic power in his body poured into the ring like a torrential flood. The ring also shone brightly, trying to restrain the flying sword. However, not far from Fang Yuan, there was a petite female swordsman with a face full of disdain. She was wearing a sword outfit and her hands were forming a sword seal. Her small mouth slightly opened as she shouted, "Break!" As the female cultivator's sword essence circulated, a huge force was emitted from the flying sword. With a piercing sound, the flying sword flew out of the ring and pierced towards Fang Yuan's forehead like an arrow leaving the bow. Fang Yuan was shocked, but he was not too flustered. He was controlling the ring, and when the ring was unable to continue, he was already alert. Seeing the flying sword's sharpness, he did not have absolute confidence in blocking it. He could only use his magic power to fly and dodge to the side. Fang Yuan had just dodged when a miserable scream came from behind him. Fang Yuan's divine sense scanned and saw a fist-sized hole in the chest of a Jin Quan mountain disciple. Blood was flowing out of the hole as his body fell from the sky. His eyes were still open as he stared hatefully at Fang Yuan. "Sigh, brother, don't blame me." Fang Yuan sighed inwardly. However, right at this moment, an unparalleled sense of vigilance emerged from his back. Almost without thinking, his body could not fly downwards, and instead, his body abruptly fell downwards. Chapter 2350. With a swoosh, a palm-sized flying sword brushed past his head, shattering his defensive yellow talisman and even slicing off a long strand of his black hair, causing beads of blood to appear on his pale white scalp. Fang Yuan didn't dare to think any further. He clapped his hands and took out several defensive yellow talismans, hurriedly placing them on his body. At the same time, he was still worried and used a few spells. Only when his body emitted a faint light again did he finally relax. However, he had just stopped when that fierce female cultivator's flying sword flew close again. The flying sword that was like mist and smoke covered him like a fine net. Fang Yuan couldn't recall the cyan ring in time. He used both his hands to continuously use spells and slapped his storage bag, throwing out a dozen yellow talismans. With a rumbling sound, the fire net talisman transformed into a fire net that blocked in front of the flying sword. A series of ice balls also appeared in the air, but these yellow talismans, which usually looked powerful, were slightly penetrated by the smoke net. A crack appeared in the middle of all the talismans. They simply didn't wait for the magic power to explode before they were annihilated. Naturally, Fang Yuan took advantage of this gap and held the ring in his hand. Just as he was about to activate his Fa Li, suddenly, a 1-meter-long fire crane appeared in the air with a caw sound. With a whistling sound, it pounced on the female swordsman who was proudly activating her flying sword in the air. The female swordsman was shocked. Sword light flashed around her body as she tried to dodge the flamingo while resisting the intense flames. The flamingo was too fast and too sudden. The female swordsman had just seen the flamingo when it pounced on her body. Moreover, it instantly passed through the female swordsman's sword light defense and set her body on fire. The female swordsman tried her best to use sword essence, wanting to extinguish the flames. However, the sword essence was like adding fuel to the fire, causing the flames to burn even more fiercely. Kill! Fang Yuan was overjoyed at the sight of this, and without any hesitation, he took out the green ring. That ring spun in the air and directly hit the female sword cultivator's head, breaking it effortlessly. As the female swordsman's corpse fell from the air, Fang Yuan shouted, "Xiaohua? Junior brother Xiao?" However, where would Xiaohua's reply come from? What was even stranger was that the flaming crane did not appear again, as if no one had sent it out. "Run!" Fang Yuan scanned with his divine sense. The number of swordsmen had already exceeded the number of cultivators. He did not dare to hesitate any longer. Furthermore, he had already received private messages from the cultivators. This was the last battle. Jin Quan Mountain's disciples were already prepared to retreat. Although the Dao sect's cultivators did not receive any orders, They had already decided as long as they fought, they would escape. Alas! Feng Yuan sighed inwardly. The Tai Ching sect disciple closest to him was currently engaged in a battle with a shining swordsman, and the situation was quite dangerous. He wanted to save them, but Feng Yuan only hesitated for a moment before flying towards the gap behind the sword cultivator. Before he could even fly half a meter above the battlefield, the bird cultivators with sharp eyes in the sky had already seen him. Two tall and thin bird cultivators looked at each other before flapping their wings and swooping down. Their target was Feng Yuan. However, at this moment, about 10 feet below Feng Yuan, a swordsman of about grade 5 had just killed a Foundation establishment cultivator in front of him. He raised his head and saw Feng Yuan's figure. A sinister smile appeared on his face as he formed a sword seal in his hand. A sword light as thin as a strand of hair flew towards Feng Yuan silently, reflecting the various colors of the battlefield. Feng Yuan saw that there were actually two bird cultivators attacking him together in the sky. He was greatly shocked and quickly used his flying technique to escape in another direction. After flying for about 20 feet, he felt a strange movement. Before he could use his divine sense to check carefully, there was a flash of light in his chest. A flying sword as thin as a strand of hair had broken through his defensive light and pierced straight into his body. Ah! Feng Yuan could only barely move his body to the side. That flying sword had already pierced through his chest. With a miserable cry, he fell down from the sky. The two bird cultivators saw this and spread their wings, flying into the sky to be on guard again. That sword cultivator who killed them swept his gaze with a cold gaze, ignoring them and stabbing at others with his sword. Light flashed, reaping the lives of cultivators one after another. With a series of explosions, the lives of sword cultivators were wiped out one after another. Feng Yuan was only an insignificant one among them. Seeing that the battle was already decided, Yuan Qing retracted his gaze and looked down at the black hole below him. He then raised his head and looked at Ling Yunwu and the rest who were scattered all over the battlefield, transmitting his divine sense. Friend Ling Jian, the cultivators that you are looking for, I'm afraid that they are the same as the golden core stage cultivators in Jinquan Mountain, hiding under this defensive array. If you want to force them out, it would be better if Friend Ling and the other sword friends of the Ling Feng sword sect work together to break this defensive array. Ling Yunwu's divine sense swept over and thought for a while before smiling. Fine. I have been watching this farce for so many days. If I don't make a move, it would show that Ling Feng sword sect doesn't know the rules. Saying so, Ling Yunwu waved his hand and the flying swords under the feet of the dozen illusory sword cultivators flew out. The swordsmen raised their hands and held the flying swords in their hands. Wang Wang. With a series of sword cries, the swordsmen's bodies turned illusory and gradually transformed into flying swords of different shapes. Immediately after, dozens of flying swords rushed into the air, and a powerful sword intent swept through the entire battlefield. Not only did the flying swords of the swordsmen tremble slightly, but they also bowed down. Even the cultivator's true essence was suppressed, and all kinds of magic tools and treasures fell from the sky. However, this only lasted for a short moment before the powerful sword intent retracted into the huge swords. The huge swords formed by the dozen illusory sword cultivators actually danced in the air slowly. Although it wasn't as strong as the old man who transformed into a sword back at Chicken Crow Mountain, the sharp edge of the sword was enough to tear apart a nascent soul cultivator. Wu, the huge sword slowly pierced into the black hole. The surrounding spiritual chi of heaven and earth was pierced through. Small hurricanes formed around the huge sword, blowing the swordsmen and cultivators who were fighting each other off their feet. Rumble, the earth quaked and the entire ground trembled. Cracks of a few feet wide and thousands of feet deep appeared on the ground of Golden Spring Mountain, splitting the entire ground apart. Great! Yuan Qing's divine sense swept over and he clapped his hands and laughed. The defensive formation of Quanjin Mountain has been destroyed. Many thanks to the sword cultivators of Ling Feng sword sect. You're welcome. Ling Yunwu and the rest revealed themselves and immediately used their divine senses to scan the area under the restriction. Naturally, Ling Yunwu's divine sense was also blocked by the special layer of soil of Quanjin Mountain and was unable to penetrate. At this time, thousands of cultivators rushed out from the black hole that had just been destroyed. The one leading them was naturally Tu Hong. Tu Hong did not hold a spear in his hand, but a triangular-shaped magic tool. "Old fool Yuanqing, do you dare to fight with this old man again?" Tu Hong shouted arrogantly as soon as he appeared. "Ha, this Yuan has been waiting for you for a long time." Yuanqing laughed as he heard this. The flying sword under his feet flew up and immediately turned into a round sun that pierced towards Tu Hong. Tu Hong was already prepared. He pointed his finger at the triangular-shaped magic tool and a bright light flew out from the magic tool and rushed towards the blazing sun. Lan Xin and the rest were naturally on the side. Without waiting for Tu Hong's orders, they all stimulated their magic power and rushed towards Ying Chao and the other high-level swordsmen. How could Ying Chao put these late foundation establishment cultivators in his eyes? With a loud scream, the bird cultivators in the air swooped down and began to fight with the cultivators. Tu Hong's light was very fierce. As soon as it touched Yuanqing's flying sword, it extinguished the flames on the flying sword, leaving behind only a foot-long flying sword body. Oh! Yuanqing was also a little shocked, but there was more to come. After the clear light destroyed the flames, it did not stop. It continued to corrode the body of the flying sword. In the blink of an eye, small brown dots were born from the sound of the flying sword. "You dare!" Yuanqing's heart ached. He knew that his flying sword had been damaged and he would have to spend a great deal of effort to repair it. Although it wasn't as humiliating as last time, the price he had to pay was far more disastrous. Yuanqing was furious. He had suffered defeat again and again in front of Tu Hong, and now in front of the other sword cultivators of Heavenly Sword region. At this time, he wanted to kill Tu Hong with a single sword strike. But what was strange was that Tu Hong's eyes swept over and he pointed at the triangular-shaped magic tool. The magic tool began to emit an overwhelming light. This light not only covered Yuanqing, but also Ying Chao, Li Min, Ling Yunwu, and the others. Ignorant cultivator! Ying Chao was furious. His body suddenly swayed, and two wings appeared on his back. His whole body shot up into the sky and flashed past the light. Ling Yunwu and the others didn't dare to be negligent. They stepped on their flying swords and rushed up into the sky. Without knowing the details, they didn't dare to be as reckless as Yuanqing. "Don't go!" When Yuanqing saw Tu Hong's arrogant behavior, he had already guessed what he was thinking. When he saw Tu Hong release the light and fly in another direction, he immediately shouted. Ying Chao, Ling Yunwu, and the others were naturally alert. They flew up and surrounded Tu Hong. Tu Hong's body flew rapidly, but he still couldn't escape from the encirclement. When he saw the others taking out their flying swords, he quickly pointed at the magic tool again. But this time, the light from the magic tool only flew out a thin layer and stopped. Tu Hong frowned. It seemed that the magic tool wasn't suitable for him. "Forget it." Tu Hong's expression changed slightly. He shouted, "Disciples of the Tao sect, we will retreat back to the Spirit Stone Mine. There are still a few defensive arrays inside. We will resist stubbornly and kill the swordsmen in the mine." "Yes." Hearing this, the disciples of Golden Spring Mountain shouted in unison. Then, Tu Hong pointed at the triangular-shaped magic tool again. A tricolored light rushed to the ground, and another burst of light appeared. Chapter 2351. Tu Hong and the rest of the Golden Spring Mountain disciples, as well as the Tao sect cultivators, rushed towards the flickering light. Everyone's figure disappeared into it. When the disciples disappeared, the light also disappeared. This time, it was different from the previous few times. The faint spiritual energy ripples also disappeared. Yuanqing and the rest scanned the area with their spiritual senses. Once again, they realized that the Golden Spring Mountain Spirit Stone vein seemed to have been stripped of its clothes. Everything could be seen through by their spiritual senses. Even the jade essences and spirit stones that were hidden deep underground could be seen at a glance. Great. So it wasn't because our spiritual senses were restricted by the layer of earth. It was because of the Golden Spring Mountains array. Yuan Qing laughed heartily. He looked at the ordinary layer of earth and laughed. Let's all go down. Leave a small group of swordsmen to guard the outside. I'm afraid that was the last time the cultivator used the array? Brother Yuan. Ing Chao shook his head. Didn't you see how cunning the cultivators of Golden Spring Mountain were? We should leave more swordsmen. But before he could finish his sentence, Ling Yunwu's face changed. He waved his hand and the Ling Feng sword sect's illusory swords scanned the area with their spiritual senses. Then, they stepped on their swords and rushed into the black hole. The other 4 illusory swordsmen rushed into the layer of earth. Yuan Qing smiled bitterly and said to Ing Chao, I also have the same thoughts. But, the spirit stone vein has already been revealed. How many people can hold themselves back? Sigh, alright. Ing Chao looked above his head and saw the greedy beast cultivators. He could only nod his head. The reason why the swordsmen attacked the Golden Spring Mountain Spirit Stone Vein was for the spirit stones. It was unwise to restrain them now. Furthermore, it was the alliance of several sections. This made things even more difficult. Let's go. Yuan Qing waved his hand. The sword cultivators who were already prepared flew out and rushed into the black hole. Since Yuan Qing and Ing Chao did not say anything, the swordsmen from the other sects also flew in. At this moment, the fact that the disciples from the other sects did not rush in was already very praiseworthy. After waiting for most of the swordsmen to enter the spirit stone vein, Yuan Qing and Ing Chao instructed the 100 or so swordsmen and beast cultivators who were still in the air, and the 2 of them also flew into the vein. Io, the spiritual stone vein of the Golden Fountain Mountain, really lives up to its name. Yuan Qing flew down and spread out his spiritual sense as he commented with a smile. That's not all. Ing Chao pointed in the direction of the jade marrow. That's the top-grade jade marrow. It's very useful for bird cultivators like us. I didn't expect there to be so many here. The sword friends of the Ling Feng sword sect are rushing towards the jade essence. Yuan Qing naturally saw Ling Yunwu and the others rushing towards the jade essence. Fellow swordsman Yuan, you have to look carefully. There really is a disciple of the thunder-controlling sect to the left of the jade essence. Ing Chao said with a smile. Moreover, he's an early Foundation establishment disciple. It's true. Yuan Qing scanned the area with his spiritual force and saw it clearly. Wow, there really is such a cultivator. That's not right. This guy isn't some Foundation establishment cultivator. What? Ing Chao was also slightly stunned. He also spread out his spiritual sense and looked at Xiaohua again. Xiaohua's spiritual sense swept through the entire Golden Fountain Mountain spiritual stone vein and discovered that the entire defensive array of the spiritual stone vein had disappeared. Thousands of swordsmen swarmed in. What made him even more surprised was that the dozens of illusory swordsmen actually used their spiritual sense to scan his and Cui Hongshan's whereabouts. They immediately locked onto them and flew towards them along the tunnel. Xiaohua was shocked. These were dozens of swordsmen comparable to late Golden Core Realm swordsmen. They really wanted his life. However, Xiaohua didn't think that these high-level swordsmen were coming for him. However, under the siege of thousands of swordsmen, Xiaohua didn't have the confidence to bring Cui Hongshan and the others away safely. Therefore, he thought of using the spiritual storage bag. And, since spirit beasts could stay inside, what problem could cultivators have? In any case, he had already tested it with the thunder fire. Therefore, Xiaohua put away the spiritual storage bag and immediately flew towards the distance. Moreover, he didn't dare to use any earth escape technique for fear of attracting the swordsman's attention. However, Xiaohua's calculations were wrong. He thought that because he was too close to the jade essence, he was locked onto by the illusory swordsman. After flying for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, he once again released his spiritual sense. Only then did he discover that Ling Yunwu and the others were still chasing after him. Furthermore, the 4 swordsmen who came from underground were closing in on him. Damn it, I am not Tu Hong. Why are you looking for me? Xiaohua was anxious. Without hesitation, he used the hibernating thunder escape technique and increased his speed again. He flew towards the direction he came from, wanting to get away from these jade essences. Something's wrong. Xiaohua's spiritual sense swept through an abandoned spiritual stone vein and was slightly stunned. This spiritual stone vein was clearly empty. Moreover, his spiritual sense was also empty, but it seemed like... Therefore, without hesitation, Xiaohua swept out his spiritual sense. Sure enough, in his spiritual sense, there were actually some fluctuations of spiritual energy in this abandoned spiritual stone vein. It was no different from a pile of spiritual stones. What is Senior 2 doing? Xiaohua was a little confused. Immediately after, he spread his spiritual sense all over the surroundings. Indeed, there were strong fluctuations of spiritual energy in the vicinity. Is Senior 2 trying to lure the sword cultivators in? So that the disciples of Jinshan Quan and my Dao sect can escape? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. He could not help but sigh inwardly. Senior 2 is indeed generous. To actually set up such an array, Thinking till here, Xiaohua was suddenly shocked. Something's wrong. This Jinshan Quan spiritual stone vein is filled with abandoned spiritual stones. There are no extra spiritual stones to be mined. But why was it that when we came that day, there were actually some Jinshan Quan disciples carrying bulging storage pouches on their waists? What are they hiding? Are they trying to deceive us Dao sect cultivators? Furthermore, why did Tu Hong place us Imperial Thunder sect disciples beside these jade essences? These jade essences. Why did Jinshan Quan not mine them? Is it really because they are too hard? Xiaohua pondered as he flew. His spiritual sense swept out once again. But this time, he actually did not find any traces of Tu Hong. Furthermore, within the Jinshan Quan spiritual stone vein, among the cultivators who were being chased by the sword cultivators, 60% of them were Dao sect cultivators. There were only 4 Jinshan Quan disciples. It was far from the previous ratio. Something's fishy. Xiaohua muttered in his heart. But his flying speed was definitely not slow. However, no matter which direction he flew towards, dozens of illusory sword cultivators were chasing after him. It was as though they did not care about the jade essences. So much so that they did not even check on the spiritual energy fluctuations that were clearly nearby. At this point, how could Xiaohua not know what was going on? That you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.